Welcome to the San Jose Hockey Now podcast. I'm Sheng Peng, editor-in-chief of San Jose Hockey Now. You can also find my work on Twitter at Sheng_Peng and also find my work at MEC Sharks.
And I'm Keegan McNally. You can find me on Twitter at halfwall_hockey, at my website half-wallhockey.com, or at San Jose Hockey Now. This week, it's an off-season week.
We have an old friend coming back to the podcast, Jack Hahn. Jack Hahn was a regular guest actually on the last iteration of San Jose Hockey Now podcast, and you see him on my site. And actually, speaking of the 4th anniversary of San Jose Hockey Now, Jack has been a supporter. He's been part of the site since the very beginning, so it was great to have him back on. And Jack is on to talk about Will Smith, Macklin Celebrini, their transitions to NHL, why he thinks Howard Toffoli is the perfect add to the Sharks. Talks about the Sharks power play. The Sharks power play was 7th in the league after January 31st. So we talk about how real that was. And so all kinds of topics that we talk about with Jack. Jack, of course, he has a book, Hockey Tactics 2024. He has a newsletter. He used to be assistant coach for the Toronto Marlies, and he worked in the Toronto Maple Leafs organization. So anyway, Jack is a great guy to talk to. Stay tuned for that interview.
It's an excellent interview. Lots of tactics, lots of nitty gritty about.
Very smart hockey guy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Where the Sharks fit and their additions and why he thinks that Delandry is a good ad. That was a really interesting part as well. So stick around for it. Great interview coming up soon. Before then, we have a few topics. It was kind of a lighter news week, but we got a few things. We're going to talk about Joe Pavelski officially retiring. We're going to talk about Brandon Coe re-signing. Hedican leaving the Sharks broadcast.
Bret Hedican leaving the Sharks broadcast, yep.
Yep, as well as finally we're going to end with who should the Sharks target in free agency, who's left basically, including some goalie and some defenseman talk. So.
Yeah, we'll talk about a couple stories that I wrote. The Askarov story, should the Sharks trying to chase Askarov, Yaroslav Askarov, or a defenseman, or a number 3 goalie, right? We'll talk a little bit about that. And also, too, in our chat, too, I'm going to mention there was a little bit of a firestorm when off of our last podcast, and Jonathan Becker may never come on our podcast again. Sorry, Jonathan. I pulled out a tweet from his interview with us last week. A great interview, I thought. And I don't think I pulled out the most salacious quote, but I do understand. I'll talk about it in a little bit, so I don't want to give away what I'm going to say, but anyway, though, so we'll talk about that in a little bit also.
All right, let's start with some, I guess, expected news. Joe Pavelski officially retired from the NHL. He had already announced it, and I think it was like when we talked with Demers.
He said that
you're like 99% or 90% retired until you're retired. So he officially retired from the NHL.
And one of the interesting things, though, that he mentioned, and he told this to, I believe it's Scott Laughlin of XM, want to give credit for getting Joe for an interview, and actually give credit to Joe Pavelski. Joe Pavelski finished 2nd in at Lake Tahoe at Celebrity.
That's right.
Celebrity golf tournament behind Marty Fish. I'm not sure. Is Marty Fish a tennis player? I'm going to look that up. I want to give.
Sounds familiar.
Give the dude credit. Yes, former American tennis player. Oh, good on me too for remembering that one. But anyway, Joe finished 2nd to Marty Fish in the tournament. Joe is actually is well known for being a very good golfer. But I don't believe he's won a tournament yet, and so hopefully he wins that one day. I think Joe would very much like to win that tournament. But anyway, the interview was with, I believe it's Scott Laughlin. Scott Laughlin, Sirius XM Radio, and Joe said that the Sharks actually reached out to him. The Sharks reached out to him about possibly coming back to play, which makes perfect sense. Who better to be a mentor for Macklin Celebrini and Will Smith than Joe Pavelski? Kind of right or wrong, obviously, right? I know a lot of you guys still very, very sore, very upset that Joe Pavelski left years ago, or the Sharks let Joe Pavelski go years ago. So I think the interesting part of that, too, is that, and not really mentioned by Joe, but I think it also would make sense, obviously, for Joe to come back to the front office. And obviously, the Sharks have made a lot of additions, former Sharks in that area, right? Brian Clough as assistant GM, Joe Thornton, no official title except for director of vibes, TM, Keegan McNally and JB Young. They're still arguing over the rights in court. So
we're in arbitration for the
arbitration right now, right?
No,
yeah,
it's JD's. JD got it.
Don't say that. Don't say that in public. You're gonna lose your legal standing there, legal ground there.
I know.
Right?
But he had the idea, so
it's
like right of idea versus So he made the whole question. Anyway, continue.
But anyway, though, so it would make perfect sense for Joe to come back. From what I understand, it wouldn't surprise me if the Sharks had done that. But as Joe said himself in his interview, he's very happy with his family now. Still kind of trying to decide his next step, right? And so I think that'll be my guess with where it's at. I mean, I'm sure the Stars want Joe to be part of their organization too, not as a player. I mean, they would want him as a player too, but also too as just sort of a guy around, right? And so I think that it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up in one of these two places eventually. But like I said, I think there's a family focus right now, and he seems really happy to be going out there and kicking ass in golf and hanging out with his family.
Yeah, it's I think with the same thing with Joe Thornton, he took like a little while off and then
Right.
kind of gradually got back into hockey, right? So
Even Patty took some time off, took a year off.
yeah, go enjoy the spoils of a successful career, Joe. Wish you all the best and see if he's eventually may come back and join the Sharks front office or something like that, because it seems to be the new thing that Sharks are doing.
Yeah, well, he also looks like a guy that has a future in it, right? He
Yeah,
seems like a future coach. He can be a future. He radiates future hockey man, and I mean that in a good way.
yeah,
He's going to be
smart.
something in hockey, just whatever
Yeah,
he wants to be. It's going to be his choice. He could be a future president of the team. So not going for your job, Jonathan, but
yeah,
but one of those kind of guys too, a VP something or
yeah,
another role. So yeah,
yeah. Executive
he's gonna
coach
get whatever
somewhere.
he wants. Yeah, whatever he wants to do at that path. He wants to go in development and focus more on that, be more hands-on. I think that's gonna be open to him too. So there's wherever he wants to do. If he just wants to be the billet dad for Sharks prospects,
Yeah,
that'd be great too.
yeah. Excited to. I mean, I'm sad a little bit that there's no more Joe Pavelski. It's really like, I mean, that's it, right? And no, I guess Burns is still around. All right, I was gonna say like the old core, right? We got Burns
The
left,
old
and
old core, yeah. Looks like I think it is just Burns. Though. I mean, Vlasic is still there too, but I know Vlasic
yeah,
he's not as popular. I'll put it as anymore because of
sure,
contract and all that kind of stuff, right? But Vlasic is still playing.
yeah,
Wouldn't surprise me once the Sharks contract ends. Maybe Vlasic hooks on somewhere as a bottom pairing guy and has some success too. Maybe
sure.
I don't know. So yeah, but that could be it though. Holly. I'm trying to think hard about this.
And
Obviously,
Couture, I guess,
Logan
but
is
it,
still around and Tomas Hurdle, but they're a
yeah,
little
more
bit.
a couple more years later, yeah.
Yeah, well, Burns, I think joined after Couture, but
Couture did, yeah,
yeah, but Burns had an established career in Minnesota before though, so slightly different. But Burns was drafted. Yeah, Burns is older than Couture, so
yeah. We're losing it
but
though. The
yeah,
core is sadly dwindling.
well, that's why you got to bring back Martin Jones, but we'll talk about that in a second. So.
Oh yeah, that's true. I forgot about Sharks legend Martin Jones. Um, okay.
Evander
Brandon.
Kane, anybody?
Yeah. Shit. Anyway, Brandon Coe. We had talked with Todd Marchand about Brandon Coe a couple months
Mhm.
ago, and Todd had some originally not so nice things to say, but ultimately was very impressed with how he turned around his season and kind of took some instructions to play harder, play more physical,
Play more
um,
inside.
play more inside, use his size.
Yeah.
And he has been rewarded for that late season play by another contract, at least for now. He got his 1 year, 2-way contract signed with the Sharks for next season.
Right. And so I think that it's a prove me, show me contract that Brandon has been given. It's a 1 year contract, like you said. It's 2-way. It's not a lot for the AHL. So Brandon's got to show a lot. This is a year for him to show that the
Mm-hmm.
progress from at the end of last season or in the second half of last season is for real. Obviously, he is an impressive physical package, 6'4", can skate, getting stronger and bigger, all that stuff, right? He's one of those guys, and I know it's sort of a demeaning thing to say about players, and I say this later in the Jack Hahn interview, but he's a guy that looks great off the bus. He does absolutely. He looks like he is one of the best. One of the best hockey players on the ice. He's going to, when he jumps on, a guy of that size who can skate like that, but it hasn't translated to AHL production yet. And not that, and that's the thing, he's never going to be a big time scorer probably at the AHL or NHL level. But as I wrote a story, I talked with the AHL executive about Brandon, a guy executive not with the Sharks or Barracuda, and he gave, I think, a really a great quote about the profile of player that Brandon Coe is, and he said that any player of that size who can skate can be a fourth liner in NHL if he wants to be. And that in most cases is probably true. There's obviously some hockey sense stuff that some guys literally don't have, but I don't think that's a Brandon Coe problem though. Brandon Coe, I don't think hockey sense, I don't think people see that as his problem, right? I think the thing here with Brandon is if he wants an NHL career, he can have it. He just has to go inside, play, not perimeter. He's not going to be Sidney Crosby like he was in juniors producing over 100 points. That's not going to happen at this level. He's got to change his game. We've seen guys like this fail to do it with the Sharks recently, like Philip Zadina, guys like that. You got to change your game when you come up to this level. But the tools are there for him, so it's going to be an interesting test. I think that definitely a worthy gamble. It's 1 year, so it doesn't work out. Brandon goes off to another organization or goes to Europe or something like that, right? But if it does kind of coalesce and comes together for Brandon, you have a guy, again, great size, can skate. And once he starts to think like a grinder, and we talked about this a lot with Dina last year. Think like a grinder, and eventually, I sound like Steve Harvey, right? Like think like a man, or whatever that book is. But think like a grinder, and the skill will start to show itself. I think if you get that B game down, you're great at that. Then the things that you did in junior, and there'll be certain moments that's going to come out, and that's going to make you maybe more valuable than a fourth liner at the NHL level. So, no notes. Fine to bring him back. Hopefully he works out.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. He was one of my like case studies of a prospect all the way back when he was playing in juniors because of how he played. And it was watching his goals, it was just he had no retrieval game. Like he doesn't retrieve the puck very well at all at that level, but he didn't need to, right? They just kind of funneled pucks to him or he'd find the puck somewhere. But he was one of the biggest prospects with no retrieval game, and it stuck that way for his all the way through last season of the Barracuda. Not this one, but the prior one. Same thing. No retrieval game. When a puck fell to him, he could sometimes make a play with it, but that was it. And he didn't
for
score.
A guy of that size,
it made no sense.
Skating, that's disappointing, right? That he can't go get a puck for himself, right?
But I guess it was just the way that he learned how to play hockey, and it's
how he succeeded for so long.
Yeah, it's an interesting study of prospects. So if you're ever interested in that kind of thing, anybody listening, it's like pick out what the players do well and then what they don't do well and just kind of track that over time, because those are the things that like certain skills have to translate or else they don't go anywhere. And we're seeing it with Brandon Coe, and hopefully he turns the corner because he is a great package of skills and size. So
right. And actually, to the point that you said, it's a great point that you make, that we saw what Brandon can do in junior, and then once he stopped doing that or once he runs into the wall in the AHL and he can't do it anymore, does he add other things? There's other parts of his game, and we did not see that. I agree with you. I watched Brandon Coe quite a bit over the last couple of years too, and I was not very impressed with what I saw overall. And he was definitely a candidate for not being brought back, but he showed some flashes.
Even like in their same years, like Cardwell and Coe would outproduce Cardwell in their junior years. But Cardwell has that retrieval game. He has the ability to get a puck on his own, and you can see it even in the AHL. A guy like Cardwell is probably less skilled overall than Coe, and he's outscoring him by like 3 times because he's actually playing hockey at like a professional style.
Right, so, going inside, right? And Cardwell's a same age, but draftier, right? Different.
Draftier, right? 1 year ahead drafted, but he's the same age. He's 2020 for practicality purposes. Yeah.
Right.
So it's an interesting thing when you're trying to track prospects, and then it's fun to see these all play out because we had such hopes of the 2020s, for the Sharks, and where they all land is interesting. Like Ozzy going to Milwaukee and Coe like signing again, and then Gushchin and Bordalo and all these guys. It's just interesting to track their careers so far because hasn't really hit so far.
Yeah, exactly. Tough. Yeah, Tristan Robbins, granted injuries, but Bordelot and Gushin, we'll see. Those are kind of your hopes, right, from the draft.
That's
And I
pretty
guess
much it.
Coe in a lower role.
Yeah, and Adam
Right.
Rask is still kicking around. I think he re-signed
Right,
in
but he's going
Minnesota
to end up as there's not a lot of ceiling there, right?
for
So,
sure. Yeah, he's just kind of
yeah.
like plug-in fighter / hitter guy.
Right. If he has a good fourth line career, then that'll be great. I mean, it's a 7th round pick too, so I'm not,
Yeah,
I'm not, I'm not demeaning the pick. I mean, if he does that, it's actually an incredible career for a 7th
absolutely.
round guy. If he can establish himself as a regular in the NHL that way, and there is hope for that with Adam. But
Hmm.
no,
Yeah,
that is interesting. I mean, I guess one day we'll have to do one of those draft.
retrospectives, I guess.
But that's going to be pretty ugly. I'll say though. I mean, I think as the farther away we get from it, that we do see that part of what happened with the Sharks. That we talked about this with Jonathan Becker last week. What happened with the Sharks at the end of the Doug Wilson era, or after the 2019 season, is that they still had a pretty good core of players on top, but those core players on top were just a little less reliable or a little less good. They were still good players, but not quite as good, right? We saw that with Brent Burns, a little bit of decline there. We saw with Erik Karlsson's fluctuations, right? From obviously Norris in his last year, but the stuff in between when he wasn't a Norris guy. We saw Thomas Hertl go up, and obviously the team around them wasn't as good too. So that probably has something to do with it too. Because you see Brent Burns in Carolina, he looks a lot better with a better team around him. But anyway, though, part of it though was that you had a good core of players, but John, though, used the phrase that Becker used, and I think the Sharks believed was that you can add around the edges, and that would be enough to put this team back in the playoffs. But the edges who they added didn't quite work, though. They got guys that were just a little past their prime, like a Nick Bonino, very good players, but just a little past their prime. And then none of the prospects, except for Mario Ferraro, really hit at all.
Yeah, it was a 5-year span of, well, I guess 4-year span of just bad drafts that didn't really pan out.
Didn't pan out, right? Yeah, so
this is kind of where we're left with. Like, we'll see what happens with Bordelot and Gushchin, though, and we still have Robinson Co. But we've already lost Alex Young, Raska, Oberg, Spitzrov's still around. Ozzy Weisblatt. Spitzrov is technically still
around. Oberg is technically still Sharks. I think he is, or maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think they let his lap.
They let him go,
retire.
right? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, there you go. So he's not around either.
Yeah. Anyway,
I love the word. I love the name Linus. I'm really sorry the Sharks never had a Linus. They had such a good chance. They had Linus Karlsson. They had Linus Oberg, because I'm a big Peanuts fan. You guys have seen some of my shirts. So Linus, I always love that name, right? So Linus. So
yeah,
kind of
they didn't go after Olmark.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Great name. I love that name. But anyway, though. But Cole, yeah, great. So great case study for kind of, and I think that if you're really into prospects like Keegan is, right, that it is really a great case study of a guy that Junior could do whatever he wanted with his size and his skill, but what you can't just project all these future line projections of guys, right, and just doesn't translate, right? Like, so he's a classic one that Junior, even the AHL translation is hard. And then if we talk about, I also love the translation of guys that produce at the AHL level. Sharks have had a lot of those guys, right? But that couldn't come close to the NHL level. Guys like Gambrell and Chmielewski, right? And you got to figure out, like, why isn't that what's deficient at the NHL level that was fine at the AHL level. You learn a lot about just evaluating prospects that way.
Yeah, that's the exciting bit. It sucks when players don't pan out, but at the same time, it's like for your own, like, how you get it better at it is seeing those deficiencies and what doesn't work out and applying it to future players. So
right.
Anyway, happy goes around to see, if there is like progression there that Todd Marchand talked about. Because sometimes that's all it takes. It's just like a switch goes off and they kind of realize that they can play a different style. So it's possible.
Do you think the switch has gone off enough that he's going to have a good year here and maybe get himself?
I think he'll have a better year. I don't think he'll get himself into the NHL, at least not for a couple of years. But a lot of times these guys, once they start to figure out the AHL, will get better enough to, again, reach that fourth line NHL level in like 4 or 5 years, something like that.
Do you think Sharks give him a contract after next year? I'm going to guess no.
I'm going to say
sorry,
no.
Brandon. Yeah,
but he'll go find prediction. another deal somewhere else, I'm sure. And that kind of thing.
So you think he'll make it to the NHL eventually then? He'll figure out enough to get himself a few games at least?
I think probably. We'll have to see with next year. Next year, like you said, is like the defining year. It's
Right,
like if
right,
there's
right.
no progression, there's no chance, I think.
Hey, and that's great too. You make it NHL for a few games.
Yeah.
Heck, that's
Jasper
I mean,
Weatherby, like
yeah.
he had right place, right time. Good old
Right, right,
Jasper.
right. No, it's great. Yeah, Jasper's a great guy too. So yeah, even
Yeah.
even to do that. So we'll see. But there is a good I don't want to denigrate Brandon Cole too much. There's a good physical package there. There is a reason why the Sharks decided,
Sure.
and this is the kind of thing where it does matter that the guy is bigger and he skates so well that there's these tools here that if it was a 5'10" player that finally figured out how to play better at the end, they might be like, you know what? Even if it hits, you're still going to be at best a high end AHL performer. Like
Yeah.
there's not an NHL future here. So that's a guy that you cut, right? But with Brandon though, if he's figured it out, the physical tools do
Sure.
obviously play at a higher level.
And that's the problem with somebody like Tristan Robbins, and he's had a lot of injuries, so it's kind of
Right, right,
tough to
right.
say, but that's the problem. Is like there isn't really another role for Robbins unless he somehow can round out his game enough, be maybe even like a defensive style winger of something.
Right, but
But
then people will say, well, yeah, he's good defensively, he's smart, but he's 5'10".
yeah, I know. So like
Right, he's gonna
that's
get
the problem.
killed in battles, right? And so yeah, that's part of it. Like the small guys, when they hit, they can be like Jonathan Marchessault, who I know was undrafted, I believe, right?
I think so.
Or a late draft, whatever, right? Or Braden Point, guys. If they hit, they hit, but
Yeah.
there's no in between roles for them usually, not often at least.
Yeah. Same with Guzjan.
Right,
He has to get into a scoring role or else he's not on an
right.
NHL roster.
Bordelot
So
too, right?
and Bordelot. Well, maybe Bordelot. I think there's still like a role in him and like a lesser down thing if
Fair,
he keeps it up. I think he's
fair.
doing,
Great at face-offs.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
good face-off
deceptively
guy.
strong. So yeah, there might be.
But yeah, it makes me a little sad, but it's interesting to compare just the drafting styles as well of Doug Wilson Jr. and of the Sharks' current staff because they're not totally different, but very different.
Mhm.
To the point where you don't know who's better yet because none of the last three Sharks draft classes have played a game yet. But like,
Right, right. And then some of them, like, yeah, the shot to Mac and Celebrini, he
yeah,
could have
like
been
they're gonna be fine.
the director of scouting to do that
Yeah,
one, right?
yeah,
But,
they're gonna be fine.
oh,
But yeah,
one
it's
thing I
interesting.
was thinking, though, I did want to add this, though, that we talked about the Sharks liking the late first round, the big
Hmm.
the big swing for somebody.
Yeah,
And actually, I think Cam Lund counts in it. I don't think we
sure.
usually count Cam Lund because that was still a Wilson Jr. draft, but Mike Greer was in charge then. And so I think Lund fits into sort of that profile of winger, right? The Chernyshov, the musty kind
Absolutely.
of, right? Kind of a big bet on a guy with good skill, good size, skates well. And if he comes together, you've got something.
Hmm.
But of course, there are question marks. There's a reason why this guy falls out of the first round or is late first round too.
No, it's a really good thought that they're basically same round part of the draft. They're all the
Yeah,
same kind of
Houghton
um
into
yeah, big winger that has a lot of offensive skills and doesn't have a complete game yet, but big wingers is the emphasis. It's not
yeah,
like a small guy that has a ton of skills like an Andrew Crystal last year or whoever. Like it's always a guy with size at that spot for them. So that's interesting.
yeah. Actually, now we think about it, right? Like, well, the Chris Marhouse drafts. I think have they drafted any small forwards besides at the
Oh yeah,
top
we
of the
talked about
draft?
that,
I
I
mean,
think.
Will Smith, of course, but he's so skilled that
I think we talked
you
about
don't
this a
worry about it.
couple. Well, we didn't talk about it on the podcast, but
Mhm.
offline. And I think the smallest one we found was Joey Muldowney. He was like the only
Right, but
one.
that was 2022, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
exactly.
still Wilson Jr.
Yeah,
Or
that
there
was just
was
the
that
one with.
influence. Yeah.
But other than that, no. Rimashevsky's big, Klee's big,
Hmm.
Svoboda's big, Halton and Musty, Will Smith, but that doesn't really count.
Yeah.
Um, Chernyshov, Wetch is pretty big, so no, they're all like 6'1" or above.
Right.
So
So
most are
that's
six
interesting. If we're
three.
looking for trends with Sharks and Chris Morehouse, of course, their defensemen have been small, though. There's been a couple of
Yeah,
them. So,
except for Dickinson. I mean, there's big defensemen this year, but we
right.
did get a few Cagnoni,
Cagnoni,
Polkamp,
Polkamp.
Landon. They're all not huge. Landon's
Lennon's
built.
decent size.
He's like 6 foot, I think, but
Yeah.
he's built at least. Um, then yeah, so they got a bunch of undersized guys.
Yeah, it's
on
interesting
defense.
though. It's interesting. So I know that fans always want to draft the Cristals, that type. Right? I know you have your love for those guys, but
Well, it depends. You need.
not
I
the same
think
with
you
the
need
Sharks.
I think at a certain point those guys. I'm not a big believer of drafting those guys early. Like I've never been. I don't like the Jaden Perrons and the Cristals to be like I'm putting him top 15 or whatever, and I'm going to draft him top 15. It's like no, they're going to fall out. So draft him in the second if you really want them. Just wait for them to fall out. So because you're wasting a pick if they don't hit, because they will.
Right. I'm not speaking specifically to you, but
yeah.
I will say that it seems so
thing.
that when the Sharks have the opportunity, even when these guys fall, they're still like, nah, we're gonna go for somebody else. We're gonna go for Wesh or Swoboda or whoever.
Yeah, I mean it sometimes works out, and sometimes it's like, man, how did X get to the end of the second round? And so you just. But I like the way that the Sharks play it because their swings are like there's still there's a projectable NHLer there, even if like Musty doesn't become a first line winger, right? Like I think there's still an NHL package of skills and size. So whereas like Doug Wilson, it was all about taking the highest upside offensively, and that was it. It felt like at least, at least through the 2020s, and then Merkley was a good example as well. It was, and Knyzhov was the first. They didn't have many picks in all of these drafts.
Yeah, they only had like 5 picks, I think, that year, and then their first pick that year was a second round pick, a late second round pick, I think, right? That they used on Knyzhov. So
Knyzhov.
I taught myself to say that name, and that guy isn't even around anymore. So.
No, he's in KHL along with Merkley.
Worked so hard.
I think the only one still
Knyzhov.
I think the only one still kind of sticking around is Hadika's had some games in New Jersey.
Right. He just signed with New Jersey, but a 2-way contract.
So, and then Linus Karlsson, like you mentioned earlier, still maybe going to make it. He had a few games at the end of the year last year with Vancouver, so at least made it to the NHL so far. But yeah, it's an interesting mix of players. It just never really worked out for the Sharks. And then the 2021 draft class is already kind of, I wouldn't say falling apart, other than Eklund. Like it's just kind of not coming together for them. So anyway, we're doing too much draft postmortem out of nowhere. Let's move on from Brandon Coe. Let's talk about Bret Hedican and his time at the Sharks broadcast booth and how it's coming to an end.
Yeah, it's really a shame that this is happening, just because I personally really enjoy listening to Bret. When I'm at home games, I don't listen because I'm watching the game, but road games I'm not traveling to. I think there might have been like 15 to 20 last year in that number that I didn't travel to, maybe 20. And anyway, I always thought that he was super sharp. I always loved his tape breakdowns, and also enjoyed that when the Sharks were really, really bad. And of course, he works for the Sharks, so I think there's a limit to what he can say. But I think that it was pretty clear what he was feeling. Like he was able to say what needed to be said without kind of going overboard and drawing too much attention to himself or throwing the entire team under the bus because he needs to sit on a plane with them. But I think he did a good job with that, with just being candid at sort of the right moments and just saying, hey, the team needs to be better. They're awful. And obviously he had that cachet as a former player, Stanley Cup winner, played over 1,000 games. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed his work and his analysis.
Me too. He spoke very clearly on the broadcast, and he was very, you're right, like you said, a little chastising the Sharks sometimes. Not like overly so, but yeah, we could tell when players were quitting, he would even be like, just saying they can't quit like this. And it was good to see from a former player perspective. So I'm going to miss that on the broadcast for sure.
Right. Again, yeah, you have to remember that he works for the team, so there's limits to it.
Yeah.
And I thought he did it responsibly, where he wasn't cheerleading for the team too hard or trying to tell us that up was down and things like that.
I hate that.
Yeah. And I think he did that responsibly. And so, yeah, I think we're all going to, or I think that he was an asset, and we all should miss having him around next year.
I didn't look into it, but did it say or did he say where he's going next or what's happening next?
No, okay. No, he I don't think he has mentioned that. I don't even think it's official yet, but Credit to Max Miller. He's the one that broke that. And then I was able to confirm that elsewhere that it is indeed happening, that he's leaving. And in terms of his replacement, I wouldn't surprise me if a Jason, I know the popular candidate that everybody wants, and he's a friend of the show too, and he's hilarious, is Jason Demers. So it wouldn't surprise me if he's in the mix, but
Sure.
I don't know for a fact and all that kind of stuff, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's in the mix. So it'll be great if he does come on, but we'll see on that part of it. That's not official yet either, but there's good candidates around that have been on Sharks broadcast already, like Scott Hannon and Mark Smith, right? So there's a couple of solid guys right there who could jump right in and have that experience, but we'll see. And Drew is still there, and Drew does a good job, and so we'll see how it all comes together next year.
Yeah, they'll find somebody. It would be awesome if it was Demers. I would really
It'll be hilarious.
At least sometimes. Just his commentary is, again, amazing.
I would have liked to have him last year just to see him hold his tongue to some of the stuff that he was watching, because he's not as trained as or not professional is not the right word, but as sort
Buttoned
of experience and buttoned up as Bret Hedican learned to be, as Drew Mendez learned to be. So it would have been maybe just a little more unfiltered, which would have been enjoyable too. And we know JD and his sense of humor too, so that would have come through. So that would have been fun last year.
Yeah, we'll see. And also, I like that last year one of the games that Jason Demers was on, JD and I on Twitter were messing with him, like not messing with him, but like saying ats to him, and he would respond. And then at one point, we called him, we wanted more unhinged Jason Demers, and then he said the word unhinged on the broadcast. So I thought that was funny. So we were like poking fun with Demers while he would respond through Twitter. It was great. And we got to get him back on here. I think he would be a fun guest for the off season, just because, and I think also the Macklin Celebrini effect is going to make it a little bit easier on people wanting to come like commentate for the team, because like there's better things to watch maybe. But
I never thought about that part of it. I would say, I don't know if that affects
really matter.
It's still a good job, media job, even if it's for a crap team without Macklin Cell, or it's still an NHL job.
Yeah,
and it might affect a coaching kind of hire, even though an NHL head coaching job is special too. But you may not want to come into a situation where you know that you're going to lose for 50 games and that sort of thing if you're a more experienced coach, right? But a TV job is different though. It just that, of course, it's great to be on the winning side of it, and that makes it probably easier and definitely more fun. But I don't know if that will affect it.
Probably not.
That's just my guess. Yeah.
I just think they, judging by how much they're able to pull former Sharks, they'll find somebody like Mark Smith or something.
They'll get somebody.
All right, let's talk about the current president of the Sharks, Jonathan Becker, who we had a lovely interview with. And I want to, because I know you're gonna talk about this already, but I just want to preface that in that interview, at no point was I ever worried that the Sharks were going to leave SAP Center. Like he never. Like, I don't know if anybody listened to the whole thing through. I'm sure some people did, obviously, but
a lot of people don't, though.
But they don't. They'll see one little segment and go, "Oh shit!" That means like it's no. He was just saying it's like it's a negotiation, and like but he seemed very.
It's not certain, which it's not.
It's not, but he seemed very confident in the whole thing, and I never got like an uneasy feeling from him at all. So that's just my outsider opinion, but that's what I wanted to say before you mention your piece.
Right. And I wanted
to for some context, just explain what's going on exactly, I guess.
Sure. So we interviewed Jonathan Becker last week. Great interview, far-ranging, wide-ranging. We talked about why it took so long to get into the rebuild. We talked about the Macklin Celebrini effect. And then we talked about on July 1st, 2025, the Sharks arena management agreement with the city, the SAP Center management agreement changes with the city of San Jose. And Becker has said himself that it changes in a way that he feels is unfavorable for the Sharks. And the way that all works, if we get into the nuts and bolts of it, is that so the Sharks have an agreement with the city. The city owns SAP Center until 2040, but the Sharks have, again, 2025, there's terms of the agreement that change, maybe in terms of who pays for what, that sort of thing. And the Sharks, to their credit, have paid for a lot already. On the other end of it too, though, it is normal for a team to pay for improvements at a city-owned facility too. In sports, the Sharks get the revenue from these improvements too. So it's not an entire, how do you say it, altruistic thing by Hasselplattner. But again, the Sharks do pay for it. They don't make the city pay for its entirety. I'm sure there's examples of the city paying for everything if we look around too. So, or paying for a lot more. So I want to put that out there. But basically, though, so the Sharks, if they are unhappy with this agreement with the city of San Jose over the SAP Center management agreement, can opt to move. They have to give 3 years notice. So basically, July 1st, 2025, Sharks are unhappy with this agreement. It's not. They don't come to a new agreement. Sharks can say we are going to leave SAP Center, and they can do it in 3 years. This is all in the contract. This is all possible. It's not likely, but it is all possible. Nothing has been decided. There's no new agreement yet, right? No new agreement. And so that's part of the background of what we talked about with Jonathan. And one thing that I asked Jonathan that I hadn't heard, and if you guys have heard, please tell me. But I asked Jonathan at a certain point in the interview, okay, let's just say SAP Center doesn't work out. And I want to remind you guys before we get into it that Jonathan said that it's likely it's going to work out. I think the quote from him exactly is conversations are going well. I don't see much probability that we end up in an unfavorable situation with SAP Center on July 1st, 2025. And this is a year out of that, right? So things are, he mentioned, reiterated many times, the relationship with the city of San Jose has been good in his time with the Sharks. I think historically it's been pretty good too. And so he mentioned all that in sort of the preamble, right? But I thought it was instructive or useful to ask that if SAP Center doesn't work out, are you guys committed to the Bay Area? And he said yes. He said that Hasso is a Bay Area guy. Hasso Plattner, owner or co-founder of SAP, and Hasso has established roots here too. Obviously, Hasso is German, but anyway, though, so Hasso is a Bay Area guy. He doesn't want to move, and Becker said we will look at other places in San Jose first, and then the rest of the Bay Area. And that's what I put out in a tweet promoting the podcast, or actually promoting a story about the podcast I wrote for NBC. And in the same tweet, I also mentioned President Jonathan Becker thinks the Sharks should work out a new arena management agreement, meaning SAP Center agreement with the city, but if not, they're committed to the Bay Area. So reading it back to myself, I thought that was good news for Sharks fans. I honestly did. I thought that, okay, like it's very likely, and Jonathan didn't give any percentage, but it's very, very likely that things are going to work out at SAP Center. If they don't, they still want to stay in the Bay Area no matter what. And San Jose first, not like they're looking to move to San Francisco like the Warriors did and that sort of thing, right? And so I took this to be a good news. And it's the first time, and again, you correct me if I'm wrong, or someone can correct me, but it's the first time that I had heard Jonathan say that the Sharks are committed to the Bay Area no matter what happens with SAP Center. And I thought, well, this sounds like good news to me. And what I apologize for and I underestimated is that I think that fans are very, very touchy about anything with relocation in Bay Area teams, because obviously we've seen what's happened with the Oakland A's. And not just the Oakland A's, but we've seen the Golden State Warriors move from Oakland to San Francisco. It's still Bay Area, but obviously fans who have been Warriors fans for a long time aren't happy with that, especially if they're Oakland based. It's happened with the 49ers. The 49ers moved. They were in San Francisco proper long time ago, but then they moved to Santa Clara, right? So there is some touchiness with that, but I think obviously it's the A's one that really stands out, that really has people kind of firing on that. And so what I thought to be good news was not taken as such by many Sharks fans on Twitter. And it was taken by outlets that are just trying to generate clicks and whatever, right? Into, oh, the Sharks are leaving SAP Center, which they're not likely to be doing. There is, again, going back to the podcast, what Jonathan said was that, hey, it's not done yet, so it's still possible, but that in all likelihood they are going to stay at SAP Center. That's he didn't use those words, but if you listen to what he said, that's likely.
Yep.
And also, too, the other part of it too is that, and we just think about it when you negotiate, right? If Jonathan is saying, and this is kind of like looking really deep into it, you gotta think about it. But this is my takeaway from it. And another reason why I thought it was good news, but again, it wasn't taken as such. But if Jonathan is saying that the Sharks are committed to the Bay Area, that must mean things are going pretty well in SAP Center, because he's not using that card, which is available to him, that, hey, we might just move.
Yeah.
Anywhere. Which I actually think, if I look back at it a couple years ago when we talked about the Google stuff, that was a little more in the air. That I don't know if there was that commitment to the Bay Area at that time. I gotta look back on the interviews there, but I don't recall that from back then. And so my feeling was that this again was a sign of a good thing, that he is, and this is me putting words in Jonathan's mouth, and so I don't know if this is true, but that things are going basically so well in these negotiations that you can throw out a commitment to the Bay Area, because they're not even leaving SAP Center. They can just say, yeah, we're gonna stay in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Right.
And
that's how it took it.
And he also did not poke fun, but also tongue in cheek mentioned Arizona, I believe, in the podcast.
Don't even bring that up. We talked about it in the interview. If I had tweeted that out, even just for shits and giggles, like, honestly, like, they would just take my credential away probably, or something.
No, but I mean, the point is like, yeah, at no point was I ever worried. So I think people kind of, I think they're a little sensitive because the A's and also Arizona, right? Like, the management in Arizona did such a shit job of being like, we're going to be here, we're committed to here.
I honestly don't think that's a good comparison, though, just because Arizona was, even when they were making those promises, Arizona was clearly mismanaged to a certain level, right? So
that's what I'm saying.
It's like, see through it. People could kind of see through it, whereas San Jose has not been mismanaged anywhere close to that level. So I actually do not agree that that's like the best comparison. Even
I'm not comparing them. I'm saying fans are probably worried because of that.
Maybe a little, but I think it's more the A's. That's my take from it. That there's a real, because the A's obviously for years said, oh, we're gonna stay, we're gonna get this Howard Terminal or whatever, different projects up, it's set, and we're gonna stay, right? And then it led to the A's going to freaking Sacramento next year. So I get that. That's why I do actually genuinely apologize. I did not really. I looked at my tweet as it was, and it does start off with kind of a fire quote, but then it mentions, hey, the arena management is fine. Actually, that's probably my mistake too. I used the words arena management. Who the fuck knows what that means? I should have just said SAP, new SAP Center agreement with the station. There's just things like that when people are reading 280 characters that
they freak out.
They freak out if they don't, if it does, like 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 immediately there. And so that's on me. I know I do take that as I could have been a little more responsible with that. I know people were like clickbait. I wasn't trying to do that. Obviously, I did put a good quote first, but even the quote that was a fire quote, I thought ultimately was a good thing, that they are going to stay here, and they will look in San Jose first anyway. And anyway, that's really what I thought. And it wasn't taken that way, but I do kind of get why it wasn't really. I do. Talked with a few fans about it, and I just thought about it myself. And so I can see it. I can see why some fans took it, like Sharks fans took it one way. I don't agree, obviously, with the aggregators taking it their way, but I can't do anything about that. They did the same thing last year when we were doing like Erik Karlsson sort of and very clearly speculated trades that I was coming up literally from my own head based on some things that Elliot Friedman or whoever, or that I heard that, maybe the Sharks want this or that, but still totally speculative trades. And there's these aggregators I talked about this last year, and there's nothing that can be done about that part of it besides don't put out content that can be aggregated, which defeats the purpose of my work. So that part, I can't do anything. I don't apologize for that part of it at all. But I think that for the fans, like I I can see why that there is a heightened sensitivity to it, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I can see it. Fans are used to being lied to by ownership and
Sure.
by executives and all that kind of stuff, right? And so yeah, so I can see it, but I will say, and I tweeted out the next day, I put it out there that, and Jonathan did say so too, that I don't think the Sharks are leaving SAP Center. I don't think they're leaving San Jose. I think that all will be fine. I'm not quote unquote worried about, just like you weren't. I didn't get that sense in the interview. I don't get that sense in sort of conversations that whatever, like post this interview. So I just want to put it out there that I do get though that why people would take it a certain way though. And so I wanted to put that out there, but also the following that up though, that the Sharks aren't leaving. I don't think they're leaving. I don't think they're leaving SAP Center. I don't think they're leaving San Jose. I don't think they're leaving the Bay Area.
Yeah, and also Jonathan, if you're listening,
I'm sorry.
Come back. We loved having you on. It was great.
It reminds me though that, and this is part that I will be a little critical of, that people don't really read though.
True.
I'm going to mention this. My colleague Curtis Pashelka, he put out a story about Martin Jones. We'll talk about this in a second. Martin Jones in a second, but I think the tweet is, if you just read it, it's pretty innocent. I'm gonna look at it. It just says, should the Sharks bring back Martin Jones?
Yep.
I think that's all it says, right? I'm gonna double
Something
check
like that.
it. I don't want to. Is it time for a reunion with Martin Jones?
Yeah.
And we're not national, so this is not a huge ratio by ratio standards on X/Twitter, but looking at Curtis's initial tweet, 58 replies, 25 retweets. So there's a little bit of a ratio going on here, right?
Yeah.
But Curtis doesn't deserve it though, because what does Curtis actually say in his story? He's not saying bring back Martin Jones to be the starter for the Sharks. The Sharks have Mackenzie Blackwood and Vitek Vanacek.
Yep.
Sharks clearly though need or maybe clearly might be debatable, but I think they clearly need a number 3 goalie, which Martin Jones probably is suited for these days, which I think he played for the Marlies last year, but he came up with the Maple Leafs and had some good minutes. And that's what you want out of a number 3 goalie. You want a guy that can start for you at the AHL level and do a good job for you, but you give him some AHL games and you don't feel bad about it. You're not worried. You're not quaking in your skates if you give him some AHL games. He has the experience, he's won, and he can give you a good week or two. So he's actually a perfect number 3 goalie.
Sure.
It's really more if Martin wants to come back and play for the Barracuda, which maybe he doesn't want to. Maybe, it just feels weird because he used to be the starter for the Sharks. So who knows, right? But anyway, though, that's a thing where that's a perfectly logical thing to think. I think if you're thinking about the Sharks organization, they need a number 3 goalie. There's not a lot of guys out there. We'll talk about it in a second. So Martin Jones may in fact be the best. Let's see.
Probably is.
Lankinen is another one, right? But those two may be the best available goalies left. There's not a lot of goalies left on the market that kind of can fit that number 3 role and slide between the NHL and AHL, and you feel okay about it. So anyway, so that's an example. We reading some of these comments, they clearly did not read the article, and I know that there's like a paywall there too, but there's an introduction article where it's very clear that Curtis is not talking about Martin Jones, number 1 goalie. So, so I do think that I will say that I think that I did suffer a little bit from that with that tweet, and Jonathan did too, because he's added or he's mentioned in the tweet. But so there is also a thing there. Yeah, read.
Print media is
listen
dead.
to the podcast.
Print media is dead.
Indeed, it is. No, I don't know if it's dead, but certainly these are examples of just the aggregators running away with it. Not Martin Jones, but with what Becker said about the SAP Center and all that stuff, right? And so it's I guess part and parcel with this world. So
we got to get the quotes out. The good quotes. Will Smith is going to be a bust. But really, what they said was Will Smith might spend 10 years or 10 days in the AHL or whatever, or something like that. Anyway, but I think it was all just a little overblown based on being there in the interview. Just my opinion. Oh, Dean Evison is signed for the Columbus Blue Jackets as
did he?
coach just like 4 minutes ago.
Cool. Okay. Breaking news.
Breaking news while we're on the podcast. You now know exactly when we're recording this. Then that was just interesting because I was kind of one of those guys that sort of mentioned in the Sharks coaching search.
As far as I know, I don't think that they ever reached out to him.
Mm-hmm.
That's my impression of it. And
Yeah.
it's interesting too because Todd McClellan was in on that job too, and I don't know what the latest on that is. I'm not connected with Columbus, but
Sure.
what we heard was that maybe he was a little too pricey for Columbus in the end. I'm not really something like that, but just interesting that you have these ex Sharks involved. I think Jay Woodcroft was in it for that job too. So all ex Sharks or ex Sharks adjacent.
Yeah, I think it's a good hire for Columbus. They needed a new start, I think.
Yeah, Dean is going to be interesting because he's a guy that should be able to mix the. That's why some people thought. That's why I thought that he could be a candidate for the Sharks job because he can mix being a bit of a hard ass, which the Sharks didn't have as much last year. Some of that, maybe that strictness, add that, see how that mixes with the Sharks rebuild, but also too he has a history of developing players, and so that can be. Columbus is, I don't know if Columbus knows they're in a rebuild or they will be or whatever, but they have a lot of young players though. So
perpetual retool tool. I don't know what they're doing. I mean, they got some great young players, so
yeah, they do.
Can't be mad. All right, let's get into our final topic of the day. Just so we already started talking about it, anyways. But
Yeah.
The free agency has like come to a trickle, like one signing a day, maybe every other day you get a random AHLer deal.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, who's left over, I guess, and who should the Sharks target? You put out a few articles this past week. One interesting bit was an article on Yaroslav Askarov, the highly touted goalie prospect from Nashville. That's kind of been not kicked to the side, but they re-signed UC Saros to a very long deal, so it's kind of made his
8-year
future.
Deal.
Yeah, made his future with them seem a little bit tenuous, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they also signed. This one was weird to me that they also signed Scott Wedgwood to be his backup. So I don't understand. And I mentioned this in the article that I wrote about Askarov ceiling and what's a fair trade offer for the Sharks. That usually when guys like this get traded, that they have more NHL sort of, how do you say it? They're understudies in the NHL for a while. And that's how they raise their value. Guys like Corey Schneider, they prove that they can play. Jonathan Bernier, even
our favorite Martin Jones. Yeah, exactly.
They prove that they can play the NHL level. And Askarov only has, as talented as he is, and he's an 11th overall pick, but he's only played 3 NHL games. So it's kind of curious to me that they did that. They blocked that even more. I wonder if that's something that they knew that Askarov doesn't want to do that. Maybe they checked in. You're like, no, I want to.
Or they.
Something. So I don't know.
Or because they're so all in, Nashville is this year with their signings. I
don't get that. No, that doesn't.
Because
they
got Stamkos.
I know.
They're trying to get like a backup. That's Wedgwood's a good backup. You know.
Like but Askarov
may not be.
He may not be, but Askarov. But the counter argument is that they spend so much money on high-end guys like Stamkos, Shea, and Marchessault, whatever, right? Then you don't have as much cap space, right? I know they have cap space because they could afford a Scott Wedgwood, but why would you? This is in like this. If you had no cap, no cap ceiling, then whatever, spend as much as you want, right? But at a certain point, though, if you have a salary cap, you got to think about how you're going to redistribute your resources, right? And you already invested this much in Saros, right? Granted, his extension doesn't kick in until I think 25, 26 UC Saros. But why would you then spend $1.5 million? That's a $500,000. You could just give the job to Askarov, who you know is talented enough, at least, even if he hasn't proven that he can do the grind of the grind of a backup situation. And if he isn't good as a backup, then you can trade for a backup in season, a better backup for Saros. Yeah. So I don't know. To me, that's curious. I gotta dig into like the real story for that. But to me, my guess is just that Askarov said, I don't want to do that. I don't know.
That's probably there too. Maybe they've recognized that he's a little bit of a distressed asset at this point.
Well, just that he wants to start. He
wants to be a starter.
He just wants to start. He doesn't want to, which is fine. That's up to him. I don't know that for a fact, by the way, so it's just me speculating. But to me, like I said, as my story mentions, that the usual history of this is to have a guy like Askarov understudy for a year or two under Saros showed that he can handle 20, 30 games in a year and excel in that. And that actually that's good for Askarov. It raises his value. He's more wanted around the league. He's more proven. It's good for Nashville because then they can get Corey Schneider got a number 9 pick, which became Bo Horvat, right? So there's a real ceiling to that. Whereas Askarov, it's different because he is unproven in NHL level, as talented as he is. So anyway, that's a aside, but I still don't quite get that, and so I need to look into that more.
I do wonder, but it could be an interesting play for the Sharks.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I mean, the Sharks are. I mean, their top goaltending prospect right now is what, Christian Kirsch, right, or Georgi Romanov, or I mean,
Cohen,
they're just
I guess, no?
They don't have anyone that would be considered a high end goaltending prospect, and I do understand that goaltending is sort of more replaceable. You don't need the top goaltending prospect. You can sign a guy and he'll give you good minutes, take you to the playoffs. Long list of guys like that, Aiden Hill, et cetera. That's everyone's favorite example. So you don't need a guy like this. Like, you need a number 1 center. Like, you need a number 1 defensive prospect. So I do get that part of it, but so let's get into sort of the trade value part, because people weren't big fans of sort of what I thought Nashville would want. And I want to remind, this is not me saying that the Sharks should trade. What I thought was fair was at least to start with Quentin Musty, or the Vegas Golden Knights 2025 unprotected pick. That's an or. It's not an and, it's an or. But obviously, Macklin Celebrini, Will Smith, Sam Dickinson, we can all those are too high caliber prospect, right? And fans aren't a big fan of that, and that's fine. And it's not even me saying that the Sharks should do it. It's just what a fair value is, and I think it is a fair value, though. That's the part. Now, he's not going to get what Corey Schneider got about a decade ago, because Askarov is not proven like Askarov. I'm sorry, like Schneider was, but Askarov is still a very high-end prospect. Everyone that watches him, whatever, he is 1 or 2 best goalie prospect in the world. It's him or Volstead, it seems like, right?
Pretty much.
And so he is a top prospect. So my point of view is that if the Sharks believe, this is a Sharks question, this isn't a me question, because I haven't watched Askarov and I can't tell with goaltending. No. So if the Sharks believe that Askarov is am I saying his name right? Is it Askarov, or did you say something different?
I think it's Askarov.
Okay, I'm going to try with that. Okay, I'm going to rely on you. Askarov, sorry about Askarov. If the Sharks believe Askarov is a reliable, consistent top 10 goalie for the next decade or so, if he is, I talked with some scouts. Some guys don't quite see him in the Shesterkin, the elite Hellebuck class, which could be right, could be wrong, but some people do too, right? But if he's, say, like Jacob Markstrom, then for the next 10 years, that's really valuable. That is really, really valuable. That's reliable. That's obviously, goalies do fluctuate, but if he's mostly like that for 8 of the next 10 years, is that worth Quentin Musty? Is that worth a unprotected 2025 Vegas, which can go anywhere, right? Vegas, I wasn't impressed at all with their additions this summer.
Sure.
And so Vegas, that pick, who knows? Maybe that ends up being a late lottery pick for all we know. So that's the risk. That's the upside for Nashville to take that as a centerpiece of the deal. But hey, that could be a lottery pick, or that could be the 32nd pick of the 2025 draft, obviously. But if the Sharks think that, if they do, I don't know if they do, but if they do, I think that's a good trade. I think whatever Quentin becomes, or that first round pick becomes, it's a good gamble. Obviously, Quentin Musty can go. He can be a first line winger. He can be Macklin Celebrini's running mate, his 40 goal running mate for the next decade. And then you'll feel stupid that you traded Quentin Musty away for a goalie. The first round pick can go, like I said, anywhere. That can end up in the top 10 for all we know, right? Or it'll be the 30th pick. So there's sort of the different outcomes to these things. But as we stand right now, I think that with, say, a Musty, right? Musty, I know Sharks fans love him, but he is not considered in that class of prospect that I mentioned, Celebrini, Smith, and Dickinson, generally speaking, at least.
Fair.
So I think that if the Sharks think that highly of Askarov, that I don't think that that's a bad deal. Either of those guys as your centerpiece, and I think you would need to trade more, honestly. But it might be then you can introduce your Bordelos or somebody like that. Bordelo is not going to be keep dreaming if you have Bordelo as your centerpiece of such a deal, just because his dad works for the Predators. Bordelo is just not that caliber of prospect. But
True.
Bordelo as your second, as your throw-in, okay, maybe that'll work, or somebody else besides Bordelo. But anyway, I think so. I don't know. I don't know what you think. I know we talked about goalie trade or trading what was the Pittsburgh Penguins pick that was looked like it was going to be in the 13-14 range. And would you trade that for Dustin Wolf? And you said back then that you would. So I don't know what you think about Askarov.
Yeah, I mean, I think Calgary values Dustin Wolf very highly because they moved Markstrom on, and like I think he's going to step in at some point and be their starting goalie. So yeah, if Buium or Dickinson were available at 14, I don't know. I would have felt weird about doing it, but I think it'll. And that's
part of the gamble. Though when I asked you, we didn't know, right? So it's just like, okay, we assume that's 14. Yeah. Would you trade that for a goalie prospect?
The easiest answer is to just, if you're going to trade that Vegas pick, just make it protected. If they won't do it, then don't do the deal.
Right.
Like make it top 10 protected, because like you don't want to be missing out on a lottery pick when it's like we've been burned by that before. I don't think it's worth it for a gamble on a goaltender at that point. It's very good goaltender. And
can you put protections on somebody else's pick though? I'm not sure. I'm not actually sure about that.
That's a good question. I think you can.
Because then what happens though if
I think you can, because I think
what if it ends up as the number 8 pick then, and Sharks keep it, but then what did the Sharks give? There has to be
their own pick or something.
I don't know. It has to be something that.
Oh yeah, good point.
That Nashville gets in the future, so it has to be some kind of attachment.
It would have to be like the Sharks' unprotected 2026 pick or something like that.
Maybe, I don't know. Yeah,
it's a good question.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that part of it, but I mean, obviously, you want to protect any pick you can trade, but I'm not sure if you can. I don't know. Could be wrong about that.
That's a good question, actually. I didn't think about that, but yeah, that's actually a really good thought. I don't know.
I mean, sometimes they protect in a different way. That if it's not if it's like, I'm trying to give an example of it, but you can give the second round pick. But it would have to be the Sharks' second round pick in this case. I don't know. So I'm not sure how you protect it in a way that is interesting. But okay, so you're basically saying that
I don't want it to be top 10.
You would think about parting with the 2025 pick though, basically.
If it wasn't like top 10. Mm-hmm. I think Askarov still had the Sharks also need to, in my mind, prove that they can develop a goaltender a little better before we decide to take on a project goaltender. And it's going to be the same problem for next year. We have 2 starters, so I don't think Askarov's going to get all the much playing time next year anyway.
That's not true. I would debate that, because if you trade for Askarov, I know that you have Blackwood and Vanacek.
Sure.
Technically blocking him, but those guys are on 1 year. You literally could acquire Askarov. You can tell him, hey, chill out in a Barracuda for 1 season. We need a number 3 goalie. You will be the number 1 call-up, and obviously injuries happen, right? You're number 1 call-up, and next year you will be one of the 2 goalies here. We're going to figure out who we're going to keep between Blackwood and Vanacek. You can tell him that. Or really, it's really as easy as, okay, we just traded for Askarov. You're in the NHL. Sorry, Vitek Vanacek. We're going to trade you for a 7th-round pick, or we're going to waive you. I mean, honestly, it's really that simple, right? Or Blackwood. We love you, McKenzie. You've done a good job for us, but if a team gives us a 5th-round pick, you're out the door. It's really, both those guys are on 1-year contracts, so I don't see them as
they're not immovable. But I'm just saying,
Saros is an obstacle. That's a legitimate obstacle. So Blackwood and Vanacek are not at this point until the Sharks signed them. So to a longer.
It's really kind of sad that he can't get more value to prove that he is an NHL goaltender, because he's not going to be playing in the NHL all that much this year if he stays with Nashville.
Yeah, that's why I was surprised that he's not backing up. So I will add one thing though, and you mentioned that maybe we wait till we know what the Vegas 2025 pick can be. And
Sure.
you are right. The Sharks are not in a rush necessarily to add the number one goalie of the future right now, right? They
Yeah.
don't need to add that today. And I don't think Nashville is too, because Askarov is still waiver exempt.
Yep.
So really,
They
they can
probably
just
want more. Like they might want a draft pick, but they probably want something to make their team better right now
that could
for
be a
next year.
case too. They can wait till the trade deadline, see if at that point, using them as a chip, they can get what they want to help them
Yeah.
get over the top. That is certainly possible, right? They can also hold them till the draft and see. Just they can hold him for a year at least. I think after that, then he's not waiver. So yeah, I don't
Yeah.
believe he's waiver exempt after the 2024-25 season. So in that case, then it's going to be okay. Now we have to trade him, but they're not in a rush to move him. I think,
Yeah.
as long as he's content with,
Yeah. As
if
long
he
as he
needs to
doesn't
be in
play like
Milwaukee
shit.
in a year, right? He doesn't pout, and that's happened before.
Mhm.
One of the examples in my story was Mika Kiprasov,
Yep.
great prospect for the Sharks, and 2002-03 season he was awful. One of the worst goaltending seasons in Sharks history. If you look at the goals saved above expected, and anyway, so one of the worst seasons, and he still got a second round pick for the Sharks that ended up being Mark-Edward Vlasic. But if
Yeah.
Kiprasov was good the year before, maybe that would have been a first round pick and not a second round pick. And so
Yeah.
there is that risk, obviously, for Nashville, where Askarov's ceiling is pretty high. I'm sorry, his trade value, it's not as high as it could be if he goes the Corey Schneider route and plays like 2 good years as a backup, but it's not as low as it can be too if he totally bombs this year, which is possible.
If he tanks it,
So,
yeah.
if he tanks it, right? So it is interesting. Again, my thought again is I leave this to the Sharks. If they really believe in this guy to trade for him, I think there are red flags with him too. I mentioned in my story that he is temperamental,
Yep.
and he clotheslined somebody in the playoffs. So there's
Yeah.
stuff like that going on with him, right?
He's got a very chaotic goaltending style too.
Yeah. So this is one where I know you mentioned that Sharks haven't proven that they can develop somebody, and that's a fair point in recent years. But that's why you have a director of goaltending and getting the Bokov, right? That's why you have a goaltending coach, Thomas Sphere. So if they go to Mike Rear and they say, yeah, this is the guy.
Yeah.
If they go to, okay, I'll put it this way. If they go to Mike Rear and say, this is the guy.
Yeah.
I think that Musty is a fair centerpiece. I know fans you always love your prospects. I actually am reminded of this argument that I had or discussion or whatever that I had with fans a couple of years ago when Nils Lundqvist was available. The Rangers made him available, right?
Yep.
And I looked at past trades and I thought he's at least going to get a second rounder, at least. And I looked at what the Sharks had at the time and who was equivalent value, and it was Thomas Bordeleau.
Sure.
And my replies back then were not pleasant. The comments were not. We're not trading Thomas Bordeleau. Granted, it really hasn't worked out for either player, to be honest, right? Lundqvist or Bordeleau since then. But Lundqvist actually got a first-round pick in a trade, and so I actually was off. I actually underestimated his value, and Bordeleau, compared to a first-round pick, would have been laughed out of the room with that as a straight offer. And so I do think that fans do, in all due respect, they overvalue their own team's prospects. And we have seen that with the Sharks. All the Sharks prospects have the parade of Gregor Chmielewski in your line projections or whoever, Jeremy Waugh in your line projections, right? Future Sharks top 4 defensemen, all that stuff, right? And so I do believe, and this is asking around, of course, whatever different sources, I do think that Musty and a 20 or the Vegas pick is the fair kind of start to a trade. That's not even the whole trade. That's a fair start. And I do understand fans are like, well, why trade that for a goalie? But anyway, what I'll put to you though, Keegan, is that if Nabokov and Spear believe in Askarov as a future number one, a future guy that's going to be a top 10 goalie for a long time, would you trade Musty?
Not Musty. But
okay,
that's just me. I'm one of the fans that loves their prospects too much.
Should I even ask you? I'd be like, oh, would you trade Gushin? Like, no, I love the Goose.
Oh, I would trade Gushin 100%. I trade Gushin and Bordeleau. Like, it's done both. And a second. I don't care. No, they're not taking it. But the point is you already did the right thing by taking Musty where you did, and he's probably would climb a little bit in a redraft. We talked about this
A little
already.
bit, not as much as
Um,
people think though, or
but
Sharks fans I would
he's
say.
a
But
great pick, and
yes,
he's
he
the
is.
kind of guy that I think could really hit a ceiling that the Sharks need. And yes, Askarov is could be what they need too, but like you said, they don't need it right now. Like it's
Right.
not like immediate. They don't need Musty right now either, but I want to see more from Askarov in the NHL before I'm like, okay, this is the one.
Okay.
And I
Yeah.
think
Well,
you're just
that's
kind of
fair.
giving up
That's fair.
too much value, even though it is good value. It's like it's risky,
Hmm.
and I'd rather not take the risk at this point.
There's a little more risk, obviously, because of value.
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
So
I
I don't
think
know.
I think you do make a good point that if Askarov has not been traded by the next draft, you can see where the Vegas pick lands. Let's say it lands at
Yeah,
17 or something like that,
sure.
right? So
Yeah,
you have a
or at
little bit
least like
more.
maybe by the trade deadline, you're like, all right, Vegas is 10
Right.
points
Oh,
into
that
the
good
playoffs.
point. Good point. Yes, good
You're
point. Good
like, all
point.
right, yeah, then I can trade that.
Right. Right.
But
Right.
you should wait a little bit. I think it's a little risky to. You don't have to. You have two goalies. We don't have a team that's competitive for the cup unless they are like selling him on like a discount right now. I don't
Hmm.
to make the risky trade right now.
Yeah, I would
You
say
might
though
lose out
the
on him, but
yeah, you might lose out on him because part of the reason why that Vegas pick is valuable now is that the uncertainty of it.
it's true. It's all
Once you get
gambling.
to the trade deadline and
Yeah,
it's a 20 pick or late 20th pick or
sure.
later, it has less value than it does now because now you have the sort of the hockey card pack, whatever, the
Yeah, it's
randomness to it,
gambling.
right? Yeah, it's gambling. You have that still now. So, but
Sure.
it's a good point you make though that the Sharks don't need to make this move right now.
Yeah, at least
And
not for one of those good pieces. I
yeah,
think.
yeah, it's fair. It's fair. It's fair. It's fair.
I'm too conservative. Big
Yeah.
Money Mike is gonna whip out some trades, and
Well, you must like Dustin Wolf though, because I don't
I do
really see
like
this
Dustin
as
Wolf.
that different than trading the Penguins pick that you think is 14 for a Wolf though.
Yeah, I do like Dustin Wolf. And also like Jesper Wallstedt more than I like Askarov. So that's the
Okay,
problem.
fair.
I've watched a ton of Askarov, and I think he's a good goaltending prospect. I just don't
Mhm.
have the same like love of his ceiling. But who knows? I might be wrong in 4 years.
Okay,
Goalies take forever to develop, and he has
fair,
like all of the athletic talent in the world.
fair,
So
fair, fair.
for the position, so
Okay.
it just his style of play also gives me the heebie-jeebies when it comes to how Nabokov and how Sharks goaltenders have developed so far. So that kind of scares me.
Hmm.
Um, and so who knows? Not that it's tough because we keep drafting guys like Gaudreau and Beaupit, and they have a lot of athletic talent, and but they end up being so aggressive in how they play,
Hmm.
and they flame out. They're just not very good. So I worry, like, I don't want that to happen where Askarov is just not what we think he is, and we're giving up Musty and stuff like that.
Well,
So
I would assume though that he's too good. He doesn't even belong in that discussion with
he
those
doesn't.
guys.
He's
I'm
way
saying,
better than
right?
them,
So yeah,
100%. He is, and
but it's fair though,
he's been good in the AHL. He's had 2 9-11 seasons.
right?
Um, but yeah, I think I don't know, a little risky for my taste. Goalies are always risky,
They're
especially in
always
head
risky.
cases.
Yeah.
You know?
I think though that's why you have a director of goaltending and all that stuff. And if they believe in him, then you make that move. But if they don't, or they're like, yeah, we like him, but not at that level, then don't make such an offer either. So. But I do
Would it
think
be?
again though that's appropriate. That's like what they'll probably end up getting something like that if they move him this summer at least. That's
Yeah,
my take, my guess. Oh, they should
yeah.
trade him to Winnipeg for Rucker and McGrady. I'm sure Askarov would
Hey,
love that, being blocked by Connor Hellebuck.
that's a great. That's sad. I don't think that's gonna work. How long is
That's not gonna
Hellebuck
work. That's not
still
gonna work.
signed for? Did he
Yeah, yeah,
resign?
yeah. It's the same
Oh yeah,
situation as Saros.
yeah.
It
8 years.
just would be hilarious if they didn't have a Hellebuck, then it would make sense actually. But they
And
do have
Rucker
a Hellebuck.
McGorty is such a Nashville player. It hurts. Like he just
He
seems
does
he
have a
screams.
very national name, huh? Yeah, he does sound like a guy that they totally should have drafted. Huh?
And just his style of play, like he just is a very Nashville player. Like so I'm really surprised he's not already a Nashville player. It just makes so much sense to me. But maybe we do a 3-way trade where like the Sharks get Askarov,
Mhm.
Winnipeg gets something from the Sharks, and then Winnipeg trades the Rucker McGorty to
McRowley
Nashville.
to Nashville, yeah.
Yeah,
That's cool.
some
I mean,
what,
the draft values are, and this is like redraft values. I'm not talking about back then because that doesn't matter. Like Alexander Holt's 7th pick,
Sure.
traded for nothing, right?
Basically.
So redraft values are about the same, I would say. So
Yeah,
between
probably so.
McGrady and Askarov. So yeah,
Yeah, McGrody's a little
that'd be
bit
fun.
more recent. I don't
Well,
know what
wait, the
Winnipeg
Sharks are
needs.
still sending something out though. So what are you gonna send out? It
I don't know.
has to be Musty or the 2025 first as your centerpiece, right? It's not.
Probably.
Again, you're not gonna get away with Bortolo Gushin as your centerpiece for this deal.
Yeah, that's true. Now I just
And
want to make
probably
it
not
happen so
even
McGrody is
Ferraro.
a
Honestly,
predator.
people love Ferraro, but like Sharks are trying to be better. And if you get to the deadline and Nashville really wants Ferraro, but again, do teams really want Ferraro? That becomes the question. So he's not a clear cut. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's the old discussion we have. But yeah, so I think you almost have to put, if you really want Askarov, those are the two kind of, how do you say it, assets that you can give up, but like just a cut below your top, right?
Yep.
And I think that when you get down to, obviously we say Bortolo, but even Beestead and Edstrom probably a little too low upside, I think.
Agreed.
So yeah, I mean that's the guy. You know, one scout did ask me, hey, how about Mukumadulin? But I think that's one where Musty's ceiling might be higher than a Mukumadulin's, but that's a positional thing where the Sharks need defensemen. Mukumadulin probably is going to be able to step in next year, and so that's hard. That's harder to move for me than a Musty. Even though for some fans it'd be like, well, Musty it's more exciting, more ceiling, so we can trade Mukumadulin any day. But I kind of disagree with that. Sharks need guys who can play right now.
Yeah, and they need a guy that has Mukubadulin's skills.
Right, on defense, right?
Yeah, on their defense.
There's no one besides Dickinson, and maybe Cagnoni, but that's a big maybe. So yeah.
It's an interesting thought experiment. I just I wouldn't make the trade just yet. I think you wait a couple months and see where everybody starts.
Fair point. I mean, Askarov could blow Wedgwood away in camp, and then Wedgwood is just insurance, and they can trade Wedgwood, or his contract is close to variable. Just send him down and whatever too. So. And hopefully no one picks him up. But yeah, so it's
Nashville's such an interesting team because they have so much dead cap that you'd suspect they wouldn't be like competitive, but they've got a stacked team right now. I mean, their defense is a little like their defense is good. It's just not like a bunch of game breakers or anything. But
Roman Yossi, that's a game breaker.
Shea,
yeah,
Roman
Shea's a good player.
Shea, and then it's like
McDonough. They have McDonough.
Do they have McDonough?
Yeah, they traded for McDonough too. No, they're pretty. They've Death Starred up for this year. Yeah, so they're pretty loaded. I don't know if it's all gonna work. All the names look great on papers, but the names do look great on paper at least.
No, I think
that's everywhere. That's on defense too.
Didn't McDonough go back to Tampa Bay? Wasn't he in Nashville?
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I totally blanked. Wait a minute. No. But they have so
Carrier, Shen, Fabro, Lazon.
Oh, you're right. Sorry, I totally blanked. They traded him to Tampa. I'm sorry about that.
He was in Nashville.
Right. He was in Nashville. Very strange. So who's your number 3 defenseman then? If it's not McDonough.
It's Fabro, Carrier, Shen, I guess, but
okay. So they are top heavy. They have a very good 1 and a 2 with Yossi and Shea. Absolutely. I would say, but yeah, after that they'll need a little bit. They'll need Carrier to be a little better.
They need a Mario Ferraro. No, I'm kidding. Mario Ferraro was just about what these guys are, Carrier and Fabro and stuff like that.
It just depends on if they like him. It's so debatable. I just hear so much about Mario, good and bad. It's hard to say. So I wouldn't rule out making such a trade where Ferraro's a part of getting a guy I wouldn't rule it out, but it's not likely though. I guess that would be my take on that. I don't think the league thinks of Mario. Like I said, I wouldn't rule it out, but I don't think the league thinks of him that's for sure. If you made William Eklund a centerpiece of an Askarov deal, I think that would be interesting, even though he's a forward, not a defenseman. But yeah,
and they drafted Tanner Molendyk, who I've called Ferraro light forever. So actually Ferraro, maybe even Ferraro slightly heavy. He might be a little bit better than Ferraro.
A rich man's Mario Ferraro.
Might be. It might be. I like Molendyk a lot.
A Tech Pros Mario Ferraro.
Yeah, and he's plays similar styles. He's left-handed, similar size, great skater. I love Molendyk. He had an amazing year in juniors after. There was a lot of questions was he going to put up points, and then this year he just killed it. So Anyway, we're off topic, and we're also long on this episode.
Yes, and we saw the goal. One thing I forgot too is that we are going to give away a few autograph cards for San Jose Hockey Now's 4th anniversary. So we need to get to that to the end. So let's run through the rest of this here. So
all right, let's pick out some goalies that are not Askarov that the Sharks could target for their number 3, starting with Martin Jones, which would be weird because we're paying Martin Jones $1.6 million.
That'd be hilarious,
anyway, because he's still on the books.
Maybe you'd be like, hey, Martin, hey, why don't you play for us for free because we're paying you anyway?
Yeah.
So why don't you owe us a solid, right, for those years that
you're getting $1.6 million AAV right now, Martin. So like, come play worth $1.6 million AAV. Oh, jeez, I don't know. I have PTSD of the Martin Jones era, so I'm gonna say no. I'm like the fans that immediately looked at the article and went, no, God, no. I have PTSD. But he's
isn't
probably
anyone available though.
Yeah,
a lot of the best ones are gone, right? I mean, we have a whole list here, but the only guy here with Martin Jones, like close to, not even close, really, but a lot of NHL experience here is Lankinen. But I think that Lankinen is too good to be a number 3 right now, and he should be able to find a job elsewhere or compete for a backup, like actually compete for a backup job elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So. I mean, I'm sure the Sharks would love to bring him in, and in case Vanacek is hurt or something like that, then that will work out. But anyway, so I'm okay with Martin Jones. I have no issue with this. Like I said, I think the only thing is if Jones wants to come back, because it'd be probably really weird for him.
Yeah, super strange.
Yeah, he'll have the nicest house of anybody on his team, which is not bad, I guess. He can host all the parties, right? So, but
this is true.
Yeah. Other guys who are available.
Happened? I mean, I guess it's happened before, right? Where people have been bought out and then come back to the same team.
I'm sure it's happened before. I don't know why it wouldn't happen. Yeah.
Wasn't there? I feel like there was a defenseman for Colorado that did that a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, continue.
Yeah, I'm sure it's I think the only the two obstacles are the Sharks fans' PTSD, and also too just if he wants to do that, because I'm sure that's gonna be weird for him that coming back to San Jose and as the starter for the Barracuda. So he may not want that. He may want to go to a different situation. But in terms of the fit, though, I don't see anybody out there who is a better number besides Lankinen, who is probably overqualified for that now. Whereas Martin Jones is probably right as a number 3, maybe a backup still at best. But that's what you want, though, with your number 3. You want somebody that is like, maybe he can still back up in NHL. You want a guy who's about that good still. And he's the best candidate that's out there because a lot of guys have signed. Okay, I'm going to read off the rest of this list that we have here really quick of guys that did play in the AHL last year and also have NHL. I think they all have NHL experience, or most of them do at least.
Sure.
Oscar Danks, Aaron Dell. Everyone loves Aaron Dell. Magnus Hellberg, Michael Hutchinson, Kaskisuo, yeah. Keith Kincaid, Ivan Prosvetov. I believe he's going to Seska, so he probably doesn't count. Malcolm Subban and Dustin Tokarski. All these guys sound like good number 3s. I don't know about their AHL numbers last year, but
yeah, they're guys.
Jones is better than, or Jones has more of a resume than all these guys.
Jones has he's stuck around the NHL longer than all those guys.
Right. So. And Jones played well for the Leafs for a couple weeks last year. He's had good weeks and months as NHL goalie. He doesn't last, but he's had good stretches over the last, and he's bounced around to Philadelphia, to Seattle, to Toronto, but he's had good stretches. And
yeah, I love the goalie, like, not the carousel or whatever, but just at the end of the year that there's these guys, like I haven't heard about Keith Kincaid in like 5 years, or like Malcolm Subban you hear about like every once in a while. You're like, oh, Subban's playing a game.
I love Malcolm because I dealt with him first year in Vegas. He was Fleury's backup. Great, I love chatting with him. So I love to have him back for that reason. But guys that like you just don't hear about for years. Like
Hutchinson had like a run with Winnipeg forever ago, and then Tokarski, and it's just interesting. It's like and these are the kind of guys that I think the Sharks really do need. And we've been harping on this for a little while. This is the guy. Like, we need one of these in-betweeners.
I feel like they need to, even if it's not Martin Jones. And I don't know if they are going to bring somebody in, but I think they need it. Even if it's, it could be right now that these guys are hoping for an AHL contract and the Sharks are like, we're only going to give you an AHL contract. So maybe that's what it is. I have no idea. But I feel like one of these guys one of these guys can be useful. You just got to pick the right guy, good room guy, a guy that can play, be your starter at the AHL level, and a guy that can slide up to the NHL if there's an injury and you don't feel bad about it. Like you need all those things, and I'm not sure if these guys can do all those things, but I'm sure though that this lot of goalies that a few of these guys can do all those things I mentioned.
Or they just don't do it at all, and we're just overanalyzing it, and they run with Romanov and Corona.
Possible. Look, they know their guys better than we do. Maybe Romanov is killing it over the summer, or Corona is, right, and they can prove us wrong. But based on what we know of last year from Corona and Romanov, and even if we give them a little bit of a sort of a pass, like, okay, they're going to be better because they have more experience, I still think this is a mistake to not bring somebody in, and as insurance at least. So, hey, if Corona is amazing and he's AHL All-Star or whatever, okay, you just signed a guy as sort of insurance. It didn't work out. But I think you need that insurance until you can see for sure in camp or exhibition games that a guy is ready to take on that greater, a young guy is ready to take on that greater responsibility. And I also, I think you waste too. And I think I mentioned this maybe in the last podcast or something, that Barracuda have actually had a good summer. They signed a number one AHL center in Podorowski. They signed, I think, potential one or a top pairing defenseman and Lucas Carlson and Jimmy Schultz. They signed a shutdown guy in Jimmy Schultz, which they haven't really had, I think, like a legitimate AHL shutdown defenseman in the last couple of years here. So I think they've had a great summer, but guess how you can waste a decent, good team that you've built, and it's with awful goaltending, which the Barracuda did have last year, at least in the first half. I think Romanov got better, and they probably both got better later on, but definitely in the first half, though, they could have used a steady hand instead of throwing out two kids and hoping Makiniemi could play. So I think it's a very bad idea if they don't bring somebody in. But again, to be proven wrong. So
and also the goalies don't count against that whole veteran thing.
No, they don't. They don't. There just isn't a reason that I can see that they don't bring somebody in. Again, I understand maybe you don't want to give him an NHL contract. Like a guy like Martin Jones might be waiting for an NHL contract. Lankinen for sure is waiting for one.
Of course.
So okay. Maybe you don't do that. But these other guys, though, I don't think they're waiting for that. Yeah.
From the Barracuda perspective, it's also the NHL perspective, right? Like Blackwood and Vanacek have had injury history. So
sure, fair.
Like, is Corona or Romanov ready for spot backup duty? Maybe.
Corona definitely wasn't last year,
but probably not.
Yeah, we saw
especially not on a god awful team. So
yeah.
Anyway, what do we know? All right. So last thing we're going to talk about is they still have not signed a defenseman, which is interesting.
Right.
Because we thought they might. We expected that they would. Then they brought in Wallman through trade, and then kind of been quiet on free agency. Yeah. So you put out an article today just highlighting eight different guys that are still available or possibly available.
Week. Yeah, put it out last week.
What?
But well, anyway, though, yeah. So there are like a few free agents out there that are left, and no, it's okay. And there's some trade targets, but there are question marks about basically everybody in there. So the free agents, Shattenkirk, Schultz, and Barry, and also Klingberg, right? They're of the type that I'm not sure the Sharks are that, even though when we talk with Jack Hahn, he seems to think, and he's probably right, that Sharks could use somebody like that, but I don't know if that's a priority for my career. But these are 4 offense first defensemen. And I don't know if that's what the Sharks seem to be looking for. I do believe they're looking for a veteran right-hander, which all these guys are, but again, that they profile in a more offensive way. And a guy like Klingberg too, I don't know if he's healthy. That's what I've heard, that he's not close to healthy necessarily, healthy enough to start an NHL season at least. And so I think that might be a issue with him, because all these guys, especially the 3 that are healthy, you probably could sign them for a minimum contract. You don't need to give them much of anything, right? And so if you wanted them, you could have signed them already. Same thing with Jack is going to talk about Boquist, and we talked about Boquist, that I don't think the Sharks are looking for that young upside puck moving guy either, Boquist, Brandstrom, because if they wanted them, they were out
Coulda
there
got him.
for very cheap. And the Sharks, for a guy like that, the opportunity in San Jose, those guys aren't looking to win necessarily. They're just looking to go somewhere where they can play minutes and show who they are. And the Sharks are obviously perfect for that. And so I don't think they're looking for that either. So that leaves maybe the trade targets. And so that I wonder if something can happen there. And the ones I mentioned in the story, there are a few out there, few more cap dump kind of guys. But Cody Ceci, Trevor Van Riemdijk, Zach Whitecloud, which is probably the best defenseman there, and Aaron Blackcloud, who is the best defenseman there, but he's not likely to move. I just put him in there because there was a rumor by Pagnona that he could be out there, but I don't know if that's true or not. Anyway, though, so Whitecloud would be a great one, but Vegas doesn't need to trade him, and he's a pretty good player. And people I talk to, that's probably the guy they like the most in terms of, okay, he can come in and he's still 26, 27, I think. And so there's upside for him to get to middle pairing level, even though in Vegas he was mostly a bottom pairing defenseman, but that's because how deep Vegas was. So he would be a good candidate. It's pickings are slim though. Yeah, slim pickings for sure. I don't mind Ceci. I know he's not the most popular with the analyst community, but it's only for 1 year, and he's great in the room from what I understand. And he's a limited player, and he's probably one of the reasons why. I mean, he shouldn't be a top 4 defenseman probably, and Edmonton putting him there is a limitation on that team. A great team right there, to be honest, but that's pretty much it though. So we'll see. So I don't know. Maybe the thought is that there's nothing great out there, maybe, and so maybe don't bother with that. I don't actually know if Whitecloud is available, so that's a guy that maybe is worth trading for, but who knows if he's actually available. CC is available, but you don't like him that much, maybe, and you just roll with what you've got. I would say that the Sharks in my opinion, they need a number 3 goalie more than they need a questionable, a possible number 4 defenseman.
Yeah.
They need a surefire number 4 defenseman more than they need a number 3 goalie. Yes, I agree with that. But there's no surefire number 4 defenseman out there.
Yeah.
So this is my opinion. So if I were to prioritize the moves, it would be goalie and take a chance on a defenseman. And I like Whitecloud, so that might be a guy worth trading a positive asset for. Otherwise, CC Van Riemdijk, you need to get something back for him.
I really do think that they want to see Mukhamadullin in the NHL.
Yeah, you might be right about that too. Yes, we talked about that.
I think they've got 8 guys essentially now.
But not enough right-handers though. I think that's
no right-handers,
right? Yeah.
But there might just not be a guy out there that they, like you're saying, that are good enough. So you're gonna have to run with Matt Benning and Ty Emberson as your right Ds.
Right, Jan Ruda, right?
And Jan Ruda. Sorry, I forgot about Ruda.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately they want to see Mukhamadullin in the NHL at least a little bit. So I think if you try and overload it, it's going to be a question of we have to send Mukhamadullin down because he's waiver exempt.
And it is true, you take away Mukhamadulin's power play time. If you say Klingberg was healthy, you sign a Klingberg, right? Then your power play becomes probably Wallman and Klingberg, or some order, Klingberg then Wallman. And that takes away you can play 2 defensemen on a power play, obviously, but it takes away an obvious power play spot for Mukhamadullin. Whereas the way they have it right now, it would be Wallman, Mukhamadullin right now. So that's a good.
And you give it a shot, and you see if they. Yeah. He needs a lot of time to develop still because he's always been this long-term, slow building prospect. But I really like that he's starting to finally get to that level, and I want to see him. So I'm fine with him not signing one just because I want to see Mukhamadullin, whether or not he does well or not. So,
and they might, like I said, this is the one where you got to know your guys, know your assets, and so they may have a lot more confidence in Mukhamadullin, Emberson, and Thrun than maybe we do.
Yeah, it's tough right now because you don't see that big point producer right now, but we'll see what they can get in the drafts in the future, or again in trade or whoever.
Right. I mean, of that list of names, the only one that Ekblad obviously is the top 4 defenseman. Sure. I feel like Whitecloud can take the step up, but otherwise, it's very iffy for sure. Yeah,
and there doesn't seem like it's worth it at this point. All the good ones are gone.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
All right, let's get out of here because this is gonna be a long episode.
We had to do one more thing.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
So let's do this fast, but this is fun though. It's a giveaway, so these are always fun to do. So I want to thank everybody for subscribing to San Jose Hockey Now over the years. I said it in the story that I wrote the day of July 20th, but really though, I would not be around without the subscribers. I'm being serious about that. I'm not saying that just to gin up subscriptions. You don't make enough money doing this with ad money and chasing clicks. You don't. That's why there's so much high turnover in this industry, to be honest. It is. You see so many writers cycle in out of whatever, right? Different websites or whatever, right? Everyone wants to dream to be a writer in this business because it's a fun job. You love sports, all that kind of stuff, right? But then a lot of times for a lot of people, the reality of it hits that I just can't make enough money. I can't make enough money chasing clicks. I know I was there. I started off at the Hockey Writers. I'm not trying to denigrate any site, but that's the reality of working at a place like that, at Fear the Fin, at Hockey Buzz. Those are all places that the money I made was mostly through clicks or a very small stipend at Fear the Fin. And there just isn't the money doing that. Not money like anything close to making a living.
Sure.
And so the reason why I can do this and that we can have this podcast is because all you guys subscribe. And again, if you didn't subscribe, I literally wouldn't be here doing this. I used to be a teacher. I'll probably go back to that. I don't know. Or I was in advertising. I was a copywriter. I like that more than teaching. So maybe I would do that. And Keegan would be half wall hockeying on HF board still and on halfwallhockey.com, right? Having a good time doing that. And or maybe you'll be with JD, you'll be part of the lockdown group, right? Who knows, right? There's different things that could have happened. But what I do know is that I would not be here and we would not be here together if it weren't for the subscribers.
Absolutely.
So thank you guys for that. And so yesterday I had a little private AMA. It went well. It was a lot of fun. So thank you for everyone who jumped onto that. And now I'm going to give away four autograph cards. And it's on the website, the cards that I'm giving away. It's a Joe Thornton autograph. It's a really beautiful card. It's a picture of Joe Thornton winning the Hart and the Art Ross, and it has a piece of Thornton's game worn jersey on it too. It has a 3 color. That's the actual card you're gonna win. That's on the website. And anyway, all right. Maybe Keegan, I can ask you to mix. Is this too late for you to mix in the pictures of the cards? So I'm not just talking.
While you're doing it.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Let me see. Is there an article for it? Or
there's an article and has 2 images. Yeah.
Let me see what I can do here.
Okay. You can do that while I talk. If you can do it, great. If you can't, it's fine too. No problem. But anyway, so that's sort of the centerpiece card, I think, because there's only I believe it's numbered 9 of 25. So there's only 25 of these cards out there, and it has, again, great picture of it, Joe. There you go. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Great picture of Joe, autographed by Joe Thornton, and a piece of his jersey. Other cards, these are the exact cards you're going to win. Patrick Marleau autograph this is Patrick Marleau wearing the old school jersey. Patrick Marleau, rookie season, number 14 jersey, Patrick Marleau. So this is a great card. Autograph. So from his rookie year. William Eklund autograph card from his rookie year. And Joe Pavelski. This is a beautiful Joe Pavelski card. Picture of him with the C, which there's not as many in terms of autograph cards. There's not a ton of them out there with him with the C because he was not the captain of the Sharks super long before they let him walk. And so great picture of Joe right there and the best of times, right, for Sharks fans. And so anyway, the way I'm going to do it is I'm just going to do a number randomizer and I'm going to read off the subscriber number that is associated with that in this Excel doc that I have. And the way it's going to work is we have 4 cards to give away, and it's going to be like a draft style or whatever. Like, so the first winner gets the first pick. The second winner gets whatever the after the number one guy or gal chooses. Right. And so, right, we get this, right? It's pretty simple, right? So, and I know that some of the subscribers, who knows, they may not claim their card. So privately, I'm going to do a drawing for kind of like your 5th, 6th, 7th place. It's just your backup winners. But let's just announce the top 4 here. So get this done quick, okay? So this is for, again, the number 1 spot for any one of these 4 cards. All right. So drum roll for this one, right? And random number generator, I have 446. So let's see. Let's see who's associated with 446 in my Excel document. And it is Steve Sullivan, who I don't believe is the player. It is actually possible because we do have scouts and so I may contact Steve and be like, why are you reaching out to me? I just subscribed to the site because you said some shit about some player.
Well, maybe he wants a hockey card. You never know.
Yes. So, but if it is not the Steve Sullivan, the great Steve Sullivan, and this Steve Sullivan is great too for subscribing to the site. But Steve Sullivan, you are our number 1 winner. So you'll get the first choice of these cards of the Joe Thornton, William Eklund, Patrick Marleau, and Joe Pavelski autographs that you see right here. So, so Steve Sullivan is number 1. Let's go with pick number 2. Goes to 478. Got to round on this so it's not in the 400s all the time. I don't wonder why this generator is not great, but 478 is Lisbeth DeSelm. Lisbeth DeSelm. So, congratulations, Lisbeth. So anyway, everyone who's winning, I'm going to contact you through your emails, your subscriber emails, and hopefully you reach out. And then if you don't get back to me, then I will give away your prize after a week to somebody else, etc., etc. But
so my name's going to be on there, probably.
No, if you win, I'm going to skip you. Sorry.
All right.
So JD, some of you guys, get skipped. All right. So
all right, let's go number 3.
Number 3. All right, drum roll. Okay, let's see. Generate. We're in 400s though. This is weird. This generator is really weird. I'm not gonna mess with. I'm gonna for the last one. I want to stay out of the 400s. So I'm gonna put it in another generator. This Google generator is not very good with the variety. I put in minimum, maximum. It should be a lot more variety than this. But anyway, so 411 is Andy Drexler. So congratulations, Andy. You have the number 3 pick. And I am going to go to another random generator because I want to stay out of the 400s. This is tiring. So
yeah, maybe.
One thing I do love. This is a side. The new Clippers arena. They have in Inglewood. Steve Ballmer, super rich. He's putting. I don't know if you've seen this. He's putting T-shirt cannons in the jumbotron on top. So then you can get a T-shirt if you don't nosebleeds. Because, of course, if you're at a Sharks game or most sports events, most of the Warriors-Lakers game, the jersey cannon or whoever throws or it's not jersey, the shirt cannon or whoever throws the T-shirt, it's not going to be able to reach the nosebleeds. So, but you will be able to do it at the Intuit Dome, I think it's called, that Steve Ballmer's building for the Clippers. So, number 4 here. And if it's a 400, I'm going to skip it. Yes, this is the last one. So if it's a 400, I'm going to skip it because I'm tired of 400s winning. What is this? Oh, they generated. Oh, okay. They generated 5. Okay, I'm going to pick the first number here. Okay, so 536.
All right.
So not a 400. And it is Aaron Siek. So you are the number 4. And so if the picks go as if everyone comes up and is a part of this, then you're gonna get the last card there. And we'll just leave it at these are your top 4, and then we'll kind of see if they all claim their prize or not. So
congratulations, everybody. These are awesome cards.
They are beautiful, aren't they? Yeah,
very
I really
jealous.
love this Thornton one. This Thornton one is one that, like, I would have in my collection if I was a collector, a Sharks collector, or a Thornton collector. I would be very happy. There's not a lot of cards autographed with his jersey that have him with perhaps the height of his career.
Yeah.
Right. So, I think that's pretty awesome.
All right, y'all. Stick around for the Jack Hahn interview.
Great interview.
Excellent. And we will see you all next week. All right. Congratulations to all the winners. Goodbye.
Yes. Bye-bye. Want to welcome a special guest, actually an old friend of the show, but a friend of the show from the time before when I did the show with Nick. This is his first time with Keegan, Jack Hahn. And Jack Hahn, he was a assistant coach for the Toronto Marlies. He worked with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and right now he is a skills, just a general hockey guru consultant. Anyway, Jack has multiple books out there. The most recent one is Hockey Tactics 2024. He actually has been writing that book, or has come out with a version of Hockey Tactics since 2021. I actually did not buy the most recent Hockey Tactics 2024 until recently, because in that book, he breaks down every team structure, every team and how they play and all that kind of stuff. And honestly, there was nothing to be excited about with the Sharks this past year for Hockey Tactics 2024. And actually, after I bought it, there is a good section about the Sharks on there, but in general, there wasn't a lot excited to be with the Sharks tactically in 2024. So that's why it took me a while to buy it. So sorry about that, Jack. But anyway, go on and buy that book. Welcome, Jack Hahn.
Hey guys, happy to be here to talk about Sharks hockey.
Love it. Thanks for coming on, Jack.
So, Jack, want to get you started here? Let's get started hot. So last year the Sharks, they had 47 points. They were awful. I have never seen a worse team. I've never covered a worse team in my life. I've actually talked with people, let's say internally, and it was like covering an expansion team. You know, the way expansion teams used to be back when we were all kids. Expansion teams like the Columbus Blue Jackets, even before that, the Sharks of the early 90s, Ottawa Senators, that sort of thing. The Sharks minus 150 goal differential was the worst since the 1993-94 Ottawa Senators, 196. So that was a very bad Sharks team that I covered. So one of the accusations that was sort of levied on the Sharks after David Quinn was fired was that they didn't play with a lot of structure. And that's a big word that, or a common word that Mike Greer has used. Ryan Warsofsky, who is the new head coach of the Sharks, he's used, oh, this team is going to play with more structure. And I guess a pushback I've heard on some of that is that last year team was so bad that what kind of structure could you really instill with that team? What could you expect those guys to play? That's honestly how bad a team that some people have said that's how bad it was. And it's rare to have seen an Angel team that bad that you couldn't even play kind of a modicum of structure and keep yourself in games. Some people think that you still could have, these are still NHL players, these are still NHL bodies. You could have made them play with some structure. So I guess my general question first to start off with is, watching the Sharks this year, whenever you subjected yourself to that, what did you see at all with just the general structure at 5-on-5? And if not so much that, like, what do you think of just the idea of, well, a team is so bad that, like, just go out and play and just sort of survive one day to the next instead of focusing on little things and beating players up about little things.
So, my calling card is sort of the tactical side of hockey,
Mm-hmm.
and every year I break down every single team in the league, and I put out an ebook about it, which obviously you just brought up. And but the interesting thing about tactics, and especially hockey tactics, is the best teams and the worst teams can use the exact same tactics or schemes or systems and come out with vastly different results.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you an example. So this is maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but before Chicago drafted Connor Bedard, and before they're sort of, it looks like they're going to turn the corner. But before that, back when they were one of the worst teams in the league, and especially defensively, they played man-on-man defense. At the same time, the Carolina Hurricanes were one of the best teams defensively, maybe the best team defensively in terms of preventing shots, and they also played a man-to-man defense. So their playbook defensively was actually almost exactly the same, except you had completely different results in terms of one team being the best shot suppression team and the other team being the worst shot suppression team. So a lot of results at the NHL level is personnel driven, and the way that I would explain the Sharks' appalling record last year was that they were outmatched at every single position. So their first line players were a bit worse than the other team's first line players.
Mm-hmm.
Second line, third line, fourth line, 3D pairs, so on and so forth, right? So maybe, you know, all it takes is for this team to get a full first line to push everybody else down, and then all of a sudden they're much more competitive without harping on structure or without changing their structure. But certainly at the highest level of our sport, if you're a quarter of a second late to every interaction, and there's about 300 to 500 interactions per game at battles or face-offs or retrievals, that's going to add up, and it adds up to the kind of season that the Sharks had last year. So again, perhaps you can uh, prevent some goals by playing the trap or by playing a very passive defensive system, but that just means that you're going to score even less. So you actually come out, I think, more or less even, and it's just a matter of like this team has to get better in every way, and then the improvement in structure is going to come from players being better individually, but also being more connected collectively.
Okay, I love that phrase. Quarter second late to every interaction. That's just how I'm gonna describe every Sharks team. Just I'm gonna measure it by seconds late to interactions. That's a nice way of saying you're bad. So, but anyway, let's talk about something good about the Sharks. After January 31st, the Sharks power play was 7th in the NHL, and if you look at some of the underlying stats, they didn't really up their shots per 60 on the power play. They had a very fat shooting percentage after January 31st. I think their shooting percentage might have been first or second in the league after that. So there's a thought that maybe there isn't anything special to that maybe that's a little bit of puck luck, but you are the tactics guy. So watching their power play, did anything kind of jump out to you? And they did bring back their kind of the guy in charge of the power play last year, Brian Wiseman. They brought him back. So that's one element of last year's Sharks that they did like.
So even going into last season, I thought at least the Sharks, they weren't going to be totally terrible on the power play, because they did have a fair number of players like Anthony Duclair, Mike Hoffman, Michael Grant. Like those are guys who played on top power plays, and at least played on the power play during basically their entire NHL careers, right? And they had a surplus of guys who are maybe kind of middle six forwards, and who can play on the power play. So I certainly, there was a way for them to construct two units that were at least decent, at least up front. And I looked at their power plays from the very last game of the season. I think they finished 21st in the league, which is not great, but it's not terrible, right? Because
on this team, that's pretty good.
Yeah, like that was probably this team's biggest strength, if there was one. And there were a few things I thought were promising. Like I think Eklund, after sort of a relatively unspectacular start to his career, he's really starting to produce. And I think being on the power play on a consistent basis has really helped him both get power play points, but also feel more rhythm at 5-on-5. Fabian Zetterlund was a player who I think I coached against in the AHL, if memory serves, but he's a player, like, he's got a good right hand shot. Like, he can score on the power play from the flank. Thomas Bordelot is a player who has lots of like little skills that he can leverage on the power play. So those guys are returning players, and you add Celebrini, you add Tyler Toffoli too. Like, I think the power play should be a relative strength for this team going forward. The short term shooting percentage fluctuations, you can't really look too much into that, but I think there's definitely something there, because guys like Bordelot and Eklund, like they're not necessarily going to be dominant 5-on-5 players, but certainly there are ways for them to make plays on the power play and contribute to the team and create value for themselves. So, yeah, I mean, even looking at this year, I think the power play should still be a relative strength of this team.
You cover a lot of different teams in your book and everything. Is it really common for a team like the Shark, or a team, to have basically no real offensive weapon from the back end on their power play? Because the Sharks have almost no defenseman that's actually power play worthy, I would say, it seems like right now.
Well, so Addison's not coming back. So
No,
then I'm looking at the depth chart, and I don't think they have a single defenseman who has a history of playing the point or running a 1-3-1. I don't know Mario Ferraro's career by heart. Perhaps he played a little bit on power play.
He's dabbled, I'd say.
He's dabbled.
Yeah, he shouldn't be on a power play. I was going to ask you about Jake Wallman, who they just acquired. He has some power play experience with Detroit, so I don't know how familiar you are with him.
So let's talk about Jake Wallman, because he's had some decent results at 5-on-5. Probably more of like a second pair defenseman on
Sure.
or third pair on most teams. But one interesting thing I saw is that he actually has one of the hardest shots in the league, as measured by, I think it's like the NHL edge tracking.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the philosophy of most teams on the power play is the defenseman is a distributor, not necessarily a shooter, because that's the least efficient place to shoot from on the power play. So I wonder, like, is if you put Wallman up there, because I don't think he's a great playmaker, certainly not at the same extent as, let's say, a Adam Bolquist, who was available on the market, or maybe even Kalen Addison last year. But perhaps there's a fit there, because certainly, it's not a bad thing to have a shooting threat from the top. You just don't want to overuse that.
Yeah, I wonder with Wallman if they'll, a lot of kind of position flexibility on the power play. He'll switch off a lot. I mean, Granlund ended up on the point a lot, and so they just kind of switch off a little bit. So things like that. Other guys that the Sharks acquired this past summer, just any impressions of them and their fit with the Sharks tactically or whatnot? Tyler Toffoli, who we mentioned, also Barclay Goodrow down the line, Ty Dellandrea, Carl Grunstrom. Just anything jump out about those? Oh, also Alex Wenberg, who will
Yeah.
also be on a power play too, probably. And anything about those guys jump out?
So we can kind of go down the line down the list with those guys. So
Sure.
Barclay Goodrow, obviously a former Shark, someone that the fan base would know really well. Um, Probably going to figure to be a penalty killer, someone that the coaches can use heavily as to insulate maybe the younger players. Perhaps his best hockey is behind him, given his age and how much mileage he has on his body. But certainly, as someone that you can sort of sacrifice in very tough usage, like that's kind of what they're looking for with him.
Right.
Ty Dellandrea is a player that I've scouted as a member of the Maple Leafs front office way back when he was
Oh, sure, yeah.
he was a draft
2018 draft
eligible
pick, right? Yep.
yeah. And the thing with him is, like, so far in his career, he's just had really bad timing, because he played for the Flint Firebirds back when they were the worst team. They were the Flint Firebirds when he played juniors were like the San Jose Sharks of the OHL. They were the worst teams. They were, not
They had
very
some
well.
controversy too, I think, right?
Yeah,
Recently.
There was a former owner that
Yeah, that's what it was.
like fired the coach because he wouldn't play his son. Like, it was
Yeah.
just like a lot of nonsense. But anyway, so he was the best player on that team, but his junior scoring was never really where it could have been had he had a stronger supporting cast. So I would say, not his fault, but his timing was really bad there. And then when he got to Dallas, Dallas had a mix of veterans like Ben and Sagan and Pavelski, and then younger players pushing upwards like Rupe Hintz and Jason Robertson. So he never really had much of an offensive opportunity to get on the power play or to play with good line mates. He was most often a third or fourth line player. Again, more of a checker. But he's a player who's defensively responsible, works really hard. But I think there's some untapped offense there, and I wonder if he gets put in the right situation in San Jose, maybe he finds a partner that he can work off of, or maybe conversely, he's been a checker for so many years now that maybe the offense is not coming back. I don't know, but I like the bet by the Sharks, because he's in his early to mid 20s. I think there's still time for him to become a really useful player. So
Right.
so I like the bet. Not too many right-handed centers are available on the open market, and he can play both wing and center. So perhaps he's going to get some opportunities. Vemberg is more of a playmaker. He's always frustrated people because he doesn't like to shoot the puck. But again,
yeah, he's the worst in the league at that.
yeah, but a player who plays both sides of the puck can play a bit on the power play. Just someone, again, to take up some minutes and to insulate the other players. I wonder if he ends up being sort of the odd man out because he's older than Dellandrea. He's a left-hander instead of a right-hander. The Sharks have a surplus of centers right now, especially if Couture plays center and Celebrini plays center. But certainly, you can't have too many centers. But I wonder if, in the medium to long term, I would rather give those reps to Celebrini and Dellandrea rather than Venberg and whoever else, right?
Mm.
Toffoli, I really like. I think he's never been the best skater, and as long as that part of his game holds up, I think he's the ideal partner for a young center like Celebrini, because Toffoli is going to get himself in the right spots. He has a lot of experience. He's going to be able to give you really good feedback on the bench on what he's seeing. He's more of a scorer than a passer, which means that Celebrini can control the puck, and then Toffoli can slide into certain
Mm-hmm.
shooting spots. I really like that fit, whether it's with, again, Celebrini or Eklund or Bordelot. Like, I think having a player like Toffoli is going to be really useful.
And I think that's a lot of names the Sharks have had. I think Grunstrom, if you have anything to say about him,
Okay,
he's kind of like a shooter. He's a checking
well,
shooter. Well, actually, he's a guy you know well because he came
yeah.
from your system.
So Carl Grunstrom was with the Maple Leafs. He was a second round draft pick, and I worked with him throughout my tenure in Toronto. He's a player who plays a hard nosed game, like very aggressive, goes to the net. Probably more of a middle six left winger at this point. But again, a guy who's had some power play success when he was in Sweden. But just someone who goes to the net, retrieves pucks really hard, has a physical edge, and just someone who can be a really useful complementary player.
Yeah, and one thing I do like about these acquisitions, and this is me editorializing, but guys like you mentioned Dellandrea and Grunstrom, the Sharks also think Grunstrom has a little more offense too. And actually, he seems to get hurt a lot, but his averages, full season averages, aren't that bad for a guy who's a third line forward. He averages 15 goals a year over a full season the last 3 years. So, and has a good shot. He shoots a lot. He is a very prolific, he shoots all the time. He's one of those kind of guys, right? Which is a good quality to have. But what I want to say about Grunstrom and Dellandrea is that if they're not scoring, they have a B game, which the Sharks, they had a lot of guys last year, Mike Hoffman, guys like that they had Anthony Duclair, guys with no B game. If they weren't scoring for you, they weren't doing jack for you. And so, no offense, Jack. But anyway, so that's one of the things I do like about these acquisitions, that there is some offensive upside there, but even if they don't kind of hit that there's still a value to these players. But one thing I wanted to focus on is just because he's a guy that we've all watched for many, many years, Tyler Toffoli, and looking over tape of him and also remember him from his Kings days. Again, a guy who's not a great skater, but he just always seems to get open. Can you just talk about that skill of just being able to just find the soft spots, even if it's not necessarily Toffoli focused, but just that skill in general that some players just kind of seem to have that not everybody does have.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, Toffoli, when he was a little bit younger, was actually a surprisingly effective scorer off the rush, because, again, like, he's not going to look to burn you, outside with his speed, but he always seems to be a little bit deceptive, where if you, as a defenseman, you're reaching, he's able to kind of get the puck under your stick and just go around you. Like, he had a move that he uses maybe a couple times a year where he does exactly that. But the thing that I really like about his game is a very subtle thing, which is he has a really great feel for how far the defensive pressure is from him, and he'll adjust and he'll make a decision accordingly. So if the defenseman is right on him, he's going to look to maybe slow down and then roll off to one side, so that the defenseman kind of keeps going straight. If the defenseman's farther, maybe he's going to look to either make a quick play right away or maybe draw in the pressure. But like, a lot of players who are fast and strong, have good hands, have good shots, like, they don't have that knack that he does. So Zetterlund's a good example, because Zetterlund is, like, he's got a good shot, he's got decent size, I think he skates pretty well.
Yep.
But the reason why he's not a consistent 25-30 goal scorer, it's not so much because of those tools, it's because the spacing and the timing of it, where maybe he doesn't navigate that as well as someone like Toffoli does.
Right,
and I
right.
think it'll be really interesting for Toffoli to come into this environment, and again, whether it's Celebrini, whether it's Eklund, whether it's Zetterlund, like, those young players, like, there's no better way to learn than to sit on the bench and watch somebody 10 feet away from you, like making those plays. So I think as sort of a teacher or sort of almost like a player coach, like I really like that acquisition. And like we're seeing sort of a mentality shift now with not just the Sharks, but with Chicago and with other rebuilding teams, which is before, we've talked about the process, right? Like scorched earth rebuild, trade
Sure.
everyone, tank for picks. But now I think teams have they seem to prioritize a little bit more the fact that, okay, well, it's not just about getting those high picks and those premium sort of talents. How they develop from 18 to 22 is actually really important.
Mm.
And the way to develop them is not only to have good coaching from the coaches, but also good coaching and good mentorship from the players around them. So it can't just be a bunch of kids with no help, no direction, no structure, or whatever, right? Um, and the other thing that I find is, and we'll see during Celebrini's entry level contract, but it's a remarkably short amount of time for a team to turn around because an ELC has 3 years. So
Hmm.
Celebrini is going to year one, and if he plays a whole year in the NHL, I think it'll be a good outcome. If he puts up, I don't know, 30, 40 points, I think that'll
Hmm.
be fine. If he puts up 50 to 60, that'll be great. I don't really expect any more from him. I think for an 18-year-old, it's not realistic.
Yeah.
Um, so year one, you get used to the league. Year two, now you have to start performing. So if you're going off of let's say a 50-point performance year one, now in year two, people are thinking, okay, can you get close to 60, 70, maybe a point a game? And then by the end of year two, the team has to make a decision on this player. So like it's a remarkably short amount of time, right? And
Right.
at the same time, if the Sharks, let's say after year two, they decide to sign Celebrini to a 6, 7, or 8 year contract, then now they got to be good. Now they got to contend for playoffs. So it's like you only have about 2 off seasons to first of all make a decision on like is he the guy, and second you got to start surrounding him if he's going to be the guy.
Right. Right. Right.
So it's a
Right.
remarkably short amount of time. So it seems like the Sharks, the way how they're approaching this is they're kind of priming that pump because it does take a while
Hmm.
for the team to get to a good place. And maybe Grunstrom and Delandria, they don't both work out, and then one of them moves on or you trade him for something else. But maybe one of them does work out, so then he becomes part of your extended core, and then you go with that. So again, like I think some fans would think that the Sharks should be better off continuing to tank and getting maybe another superstar. But at the same time, when you do that, the longer you tank, the longer it takes to get it going again. So I think the Sharks are trying to walk that line. And, you see what Chicago's doing. It's a similar story where they're already looking to surround Bedard because
Right.
last year he
Right.
was by himself out there.
Right, right, right. And I wanted to also ask you about that skill, though you mentioned Toffoli, that ability to sort of get open and read defenses. How much of a skill like that is teachable, can rub off on a Zetterlin, etc.? And how much of that is just sort of, maybe he's born with it?
Um, it is teachable, but again, it depends on how much time and how much sort of practice resources you have.
Mm.
And I think that's the tricky thing because, yes, I can sit here and tell you that it's teachable because I teach it to the players I work with, the 14, 16, or 18-year-olds. But it doesn't mean that an NHLer could go from below average to above average just because it's already so competitive. And most players have basically made the most of their natural talent already.
Interesting. And it's you mentioned earlier the 18 to 22 time frame. Is that kind of not like a hard and fast rule with you, but do you kind of buy into that like by 23 you're kind of done essentially, you think, in terms of your development?
Um, but that's the average, right? Because some
Yeah,
players
of
peak at
course.
18, some players peak at 20, some players peak at 27, 30. Like Zach
Hmm.
Hyman just scored 50 goals and he's 29 years old for the first time,
Impressive.
right? Uh, Gus Forsling at 23 was an AHLer and now he's a number one defenseman in the league.
Yep.
So I think you just got to keep your mind open to that. But what I mean most of all is if you're an 18-year-old player with all the talent in the world, but you're not well surrounded and you're not in a good environment, you're not going to make the best of your potential. And another way to look at it is if you look at Nathan McKinnon's career, he had 140 points last year. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you look at the first 4 years of his career,
Yeah, great
he
example.
had a good rookie season. His sophomore season was a step back, and then his third year was even worse. I think he had like something like 36 points over 80 games, which is ridiculous for
Wow.
a player of his talent. But what happened with him, and I wrote about this last night actually on my newsletter, is he became much more aware of some of the small details in his game that were sort of holding him back, and that was sort of allowing defense to read his decisions. So he
Mm-hmm.
had a tell, which is as a right-handed player, he would dip his shoulder whenever he tried to make a play, and he was used to kind of making a play from sort of a falling to the right sort of posture, and he fixed that over the years. And not only does his shot have more pop now, but he's more deceptive. He can pass. Find passing options that he couldn't before. So it's completely transformed his production, even though he always had that natural explosiveness and those quick hands and all that. So, uh, and, again, McKinnon came into the league as an amazing 18-year-old, but he found one or two or three other levels by continuing to improve throughout his 20s.
And Jack, because you mentioned it, I just want to put it out there. So, guys, you definitely should subscribe to Jack's newsletter. I do. It comes into my mailbox every day. How do people to subscribe?
So if you look on Google, it's the Hockey Tactics newsletter. It's jhanhky.substack.com. So there's a mix of free and paid content out there, but certainly for someone who wants to learn more about hockey tactics or player development or even like career development, then check it out.
Love it. And we got a few more questions for you here,
Sure,
Jack.
go
And I
ahead.
think we've already kind of talked about Celebrini and like possibly his immediate NHL impact and maybe his ceiling. But let's talk a little bit about Will Smith if we can, because he kind of there's been a lot of comparisons of like Taves and Kane and Malkin and Crosby kind of thing, like the 1-2 dynamic duo when you're rebuilding a franchise. But do you see Smith in that kind of role in the future? Do you think?
Well, I mean, like I think Celebrini, when I watch him, he was the only player in this year's draft class where I say like he doesn't really have any weakness. Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
see any red flags when it comes to translating his game to the NHL, which like I'm really picky about those kind of things.
Yeah.
But he's a player who I think like could step into the league, and as long as he's healthy, I think he'll be fine. Smith is a player who I would kind of compare a little bit more to Eklund, where he needs a little bit more help around him. He needs people to play with, and I think his timing should be good because he's coming into a team that is certainly much less bare than it was last year or the year before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Eklund would already be sort of like a young veteran and a key guy on this team. Celebrini is going to be there. We mentioned Toffoli. Couture is still there. So I think there's somebody that he can play with this season if he makes the NHL.
And that's the other question, I guess, is some people have had very lofty expectations of Will Smith, and some people are very down on his game. And I think we kind of ask every single guest, like, where do you fall? What's your overall feel on Will Smith?
I don't know. Like it's really early, and
Mm-hmm.
does he have any NHL games played yet, or
No,
no?
he doesn't.
Nope. He,
Yeah.
he
So
signed after the season.
yeah. So the toughest thing to project is a player like who hasn't played any NHL games,
Yep.
because you look at the production and it's solid, and he should figure to be a top six player, but he's like not a player who I would say is like a true like all weather player. Like
Mm-hmm.
you need to help him out by putting him into some good context. So that's where actually the Coutures and the Goodrows really help, because they can soak up the difficult defensive deployment so that maybe Smith gets more offensive deployment or maybe some easier minutes. He sees some third pair defensemen to build up his confidence. Like he's the kind of player where I would much rather him play in the AHL and be really dominant there for
Mm-hmm.
a couple of years, if he can immediately crack the NHL and be an impact maker.
Hmm. And we kind of touched on this earlier with just talking about the entire Sharks lineup and their new additions. But when you look at this lineup in general, is there a player that jumps out to you that they should acquire this type of player to make themselves more competitive now? And I saw that on Twitter you mentioned Ehlers or a Netchus, but of course these are obviously good players, but they also have salary things, cap kind of commitments that I don't know if the Sharks are ready for that kind of commitment to a player at this point in the rebuild. Since, like as you mentioned, we don't know how good Celebrini and Smith actually are at the NHL level. So maybe not until you know that do you make a huge commitment. But I guess what I would ask though in general is just, is there a type of player that you just look at this line like they need a speed scoring type? They just need this kind of type, and this is what the Smiths and the Celebrinis of the world need, or do they kind of have that already in a Toffoli and sort of they have kind of enough to start with? Just obviously they're not going to make the playoffs, but just enough to start with now.
Well, again, like I talked about how the Sharks are now like they quickly have to turn from a rebuilding team into a team that's at least kind of on an upward trajectory. So certainly, if someone like Ehlers and Nichas becomes available at a reasonable price, I think the Sharks should look into that, because the rule of thumb is always be upgrading, right? So the Sharks now they've upgraded via the draft, and they're looking to upgrade not necessarily with a veteran player in his 30s, but someone in his mid 20s who, for whatever reason, his current team has soured on, but who's a good player. Um, with the cap going up, even if they're signed for $6, $7, $8 million, like perhaps that becomes a bargain later on, right? Like there's still a chance for them to live up to that deal.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I just see is like they're sort of underskilled on the back end. They don't have a true power play quarterback. They don't have a player who can put up points, and it's actually it's an opportunity because these some offensive defensemen are available, right? Like we saw during the offseason, whether it's Goss Despair or Adam Boquist or you name it. Like some of those players were available at Eric Brandstrom. And the thing with the Sharks is, even though they're still sort of a rebuilding team, they have weaknesses in certain parts of the lineup. The advantage that they have is they have opportunities, right? Like the point position on their first power play is wide open right now. Maybe they go 5 forwards with Granlund playing up top again, but certainly if you plug any sort of decent offensive NHL defenseman there, he's going to put up 30, 40, 50 points, and then he's going to be an asset that can be traded for someone who can be around long term. So again, the Sharks, they've already upgraded. I think they're looking to upgrade, but also the fact that they have roster spots and certain sort of really valuable roster spots open allows them to sort of create assets out of thin air and to farm those assets and turn them into sort of more long-term value. So if I were the Sharks, I would look into that. I think certainly during the season, certain players become available that maybe you don't expect, and those could be good opportunities. But certainly, I would hope that at the next year's trade deadline, that the Sharks would be shipping out someone who maybe has put up some points on the back end, especially on the power play, to a Stanley Cup contending team who are looking for more depth, because the Sharks have that position open and they're willing to maybe sort of farm that resource and create a trade asset.
And speaking of defenders, the Sharks at pick number 11 in last year's draft ended up drafting up Sam Dickinson. At the time, there was another offensive defenseman, Z Buyam, who was still on the board that a lot of Sharks were thinking they might go for, just because it seems like his offensive ceiling might be higher by some people's opinion. But we wanted to get your opinion on just the thought of the defenseman in this class, and then maybe somebody like Parekh or Yakimchuk versus a guy like Dickinson or Buyam, and where the Sharks could have used a Buyam.
And Jack also did a workshop on Parekh, so excellent video workshop. So check that out. So anyway, go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, this year's defenseman class was really interesting because like I talked to some of my colleagues who are scouts, and a lot of them had kind of different rankings, and based on their personal sort of preferences or biases or experiences. I found it a relatively difficult one because, when I said Celebrini is a player who I don't see any red flags for, well, with these like I see red flags with all of them. So with Parekh, well, it's he's undersized, and he's a goal scorer as a defenseman, which is very rare, and maybe that doesn't translate. with Buyam. Like, I don't think he defends very well at all. I think, obviously he put up an incredible amount of points as a draft eligible defenseman in NCAA Division One. I don't think a lot of that is real. Like, maybe next year he goes back in the same conditions and he might only get 35 points instead of 40 or whatever he had. Um, he's a player who he likes to have the puck on his stick in the offensive zone, and he really likes to work off the cycle, which if you're a team that's more of a counterattacking team, you're a team that's, let's say you're more Vegas, or you're more Florida, like maybe that's not how you want to play. Like there's a systems fit aspect to his game that you have to consider. He's not the biggest guy. He's not the best defender. Dickinson, good skater, good defender. Looks like he's going to play in the NHL for a long time, but is it going to be as a second pair guy? Is it going to be as a third pair guy? Like I kind of doubt the absolute ceiling on his game. So there's really no perfect prospect. Levshinov, another big point producer in college. Like a lot of that comes from just him chucking a lot of shots from the point, which is not going to be anything special once you get to the NHL level. He's going to have to add more nuance to his offense. Salayev, big guy, skates really well, shut down defender, offensive upside is really questionable. Like all of these top Ds, there's not one that you can look at and say, well, like this guy's a sure thing. Like they all have risk factors in their own ways.
Yeah. So it seems like the Sharks went for, at the time, the guy that seems like maybe he's going to be an NHL defender. And I think that's what they were looking for, right?
Maybe safer, I guess, in some ways,
Yeah.
to pick.
Maybe the word safe comes into
Yeah,
play.
and like that's what I thought when I watched him. Like he's a guy who you watch closely and he does a lot of things well, but nothing that's like, I got to write this down. Like this is
Mm-hmm.
something special. Like he's just a guy who's solid and who plays a ton. And the player he reminds me of is Evan Bouchard, who ironically also played for the London Knights. But I scouted Evan Bouchard during his draft year, and I was like, this guy plays 35 minutes a game, and it looks like he's pacing himself. He's always like going 60% of his maximum intensity, right? And I'm like, I don't know if this can work. Whereas other guys in his year, I think Boquist was in his year, Brandstrom was the year before, but guys like that, like they were flashier, they were more intense, they played at a higher pace, and they ended up not being half the player that Bouchard is at the NHL level. So what do I know ultimately, right? So
we're all wrong all the time.
Perhaps Dickinson is going to be one of those kinds of players, or maybe he's going to make the NHL, but he's always going to be a little bit of a disappointment because teams expect him to be sort of a first pair all situation player, and he ends up being maybe more of a support player. Who knows?
Sure. He might be one of those guys. I mean, he might be one of those guys great off the bus, looks great off the bus and just doesn't quite do it right. Yeah. So, but yeah, like you said, he may be Bouchard too. But I would ask you just for fun, then you have the number 2 pick. You're Chicago. Let's say you're gonna pick a defenseman. You're set on that. Who do you pick then out of this group?
I mean, they pick Levshinov. I think, yeah, like that. I would probably go with that because the skating and the physical frame, I think is definitely going to translate. The fact that he's a right-hander helps because you can get you can get a good left-handed defenseman for a draft pick, right? You can even get a good left-handed defenseman on waivers, like Forsling. Forsling was moved on waivers a couple of times, but a good right-handed defenseman is hard to come by. And I think the offensive part of his game is if you give him the right teaching, what time is going to come along. And, he still has a good shot. And perhaps, shooting from the point has become a little bit undervalued at this point. But yeah, like I think he's the best, in my opinion, he's the best compromise. I know lots of scouts and a lot of my colleagues who would disagree with me, but I think the Hawks made out fine there.
Okay. And kind of moving on, one of the interesting things that the Sharks have done this offseason is they've hired Jeff Ulmer as assistant coach. And Jeff Ulmer's background, at least back with the Arizona Coyotes, was more in skills and development. The last 3 years, he's been with the Abbotsford Canucks. He's assistant coach, works with the forwards and the power play. But anyway, having Ulmer come in, a guy focused in that way on the Sharks staff too, he will be more focused on kind of skills and development because you'll have Brian Wiseman for the power play. They hired Doug Kuda for the penalty kill and the defense. So having a guy like that on the staff, though, obviously coincides. This is all on purpose with Will Smith coming in and Macklin Celebrini coming in, and Willie Macklin still being around and guys like that. And so anyway, I wanted to just ask you, like, what is the value of having a coach like that, like a Jeff Omer on the bench to work with guys like a Macklin Celebrini in his first year?
So I actually think that there's a lot of value in that, and I think the value is sort of very underrated if you're just a casual fan who watches the games, because I would say for someone with that background to come in, the biggest value is going to be on practice days and sort of like during morning skates even, because if you look at NHL coaching staffs, I've had experiences working with NHL coaching staffs, and a lot of them, they don't like to stay on after practice to work with players individually because their schedules are so jam packed that they got a meeting to prepare, they got a pre-scout to do, they have lots of different responsibilities. Or maybe, we have a lot of older gentlemen who coach in this league, and maybe they're skating, and their stamina isn't where it used to be, and it's difficult for them to give the younger players a good challenge if they're skating, let's say, in more of a skill sessions context. Um, so the mixture of those two factors means that I find it's always helpful to have someone who's younger, who has more of a skills development background, who's a more uh, a more functional player, to stay on after team
Mm,
practice with the younger players to put them through reps. Maybe somebody's a little bit banged up, somebody's day to day. Stay on, skate with them, help them throughout this return to play process. I think there's a lot of value in that.
mm.
Like if your fourth or fifth assistant coach at the NHL level is someone who's a skills coach who can skate with, maybe a recently retired pro or somebody who still skates really well and can give a challenge, I think that makes our players better, and it takes a lot of pressure off of the other coaching staff members too.
And going back to your book real quick, just so we can get you out of here, because I know you've been talking with us for a little while, but you talked a lot about William Eklund in the book, and we've already mentioned him a few times already, but do you have any thoughts on his ceiling, or what you think he needs to improve on to even take that next step from like 40, 50 point player to like 60, 70 point player?
Well, for him to take that step, he's got to have more of a supporting cast.
Hmm.
And the thing with Eklund is, again, even going back to his draft year, he wasn't the same sort of can't miss prospect because of the size issue. He's not a physically dominant player. The way that he's going to have success in this league as an offensive difference maker is if he can play give and go, if he can play in space, if he can play with a line mate who attracts at least as much attention as he does. So I remember last year I talked with Sheng at the start of the year about Eklund, and I said, I really want him to play with Thomas Hurdle, because Thomas Hurdle is probably the only forward on this team who has the kind of gravity and that kind of ability to
Sure.
hold the puck to
Sure.
create. So now, presumably the Sharks have a few more of those players, and that's only going to help Eklund. And going back to Eklund's most recent season, I found it really encouraging that he's really taken a sort of a starring role in the power play. His point production has come along. He's on pace to be a top line player in this league, but to be a top line player, you're basically only as good as your line mates, right? So I think the Sharks are on their way of finding him those line mates. It might be a bit of a stretch to think that Eklund, Celebrini, and Will Smith are going to play in the same line this year. I might spread them out on two lines or maybe even three lines. The example that comes to mind is Toronto. Right before I got there, they had Nazem Kadri and Leo Komarov as their matchup line. So they
Hmm.
played, against the other team's best, and then uh, Austin Matthews and Nylander were quote unquote the second line with either Zach Hyman or Connor Brown, and then they had James Van Riemsdyk, Tyler Bozak, and Mitch Marner as their third line, or their third uh, most defensively used line. So
Mm.
and the Leafs made a really quick turnaround. Obviously they had some luck with the players that they drafted, with the players that they ended up keeping, but um, that would, I think, be the best case scenario for the Sharks this season.
Well, Sharks fans would love to see a 71 Celebrini, a 72 Eklund, and a 73 Toffoli line. So what do you think of that kind of fit? Actually kind of makes sense because you have a passer in Eklund, you have a shooter in Toffoli, you have a guy like Celebrini who projects to be a glue guy, right? A guy that you can play anybody with because he's defensively responsible and all that. So that sound good to you?
Yeah, I mean, I try that. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, love it. And final question is um, I guess this is just like a more of a general question as well. Is about the young guys coming in as wingers rather than centers, because we have two guys like Celebrini and Smith that are going to come in. Celebrini's been a center his whole life and probably will continue to be so. But like you mentioned earlier, the Sharks have signed a lot of centers. So do you think it's advantageous to start a young guy on the wing like that if they aren't really as well rounded as a guy like Celebrini? So like somebody like Will Smith, for example.
So the thing, the whole like center debate, like you got to kind of split it to two conversations. The first one is face-offs. So obviously playing face-off is a big part of playing center, and when you're a young player like a 18 or 20-year-old who hasn't fully grown to his body, like for the first few months, you're gonna get dominated in the face-off
Yeah,
circle
like
just because
universally they're
Like
bad.
Bedard, yeah.
you don't have like the old man strength. You don't have the maybe the anticipation or the understanding of the other center's tendencies. Like you're going to get beat up for 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 months
Hmm.
as you start. Once you see every single center in the league, and once they've had their way with you, so that part is. Um, I would say like you're just gonna have to eat your lumps. I think for Celebrini, I think it's worthwhile to just put him there and see what happens. Maybe for other players like like for Will Smith or Eklund, like they're maybe you want to avoid that. But the face off thing is just it's a necessary evil, and at some point you're gonna have to experience it. And even the best face off takers in the league, or some of the best centers in the league, they started their careers at like 35, 45% in the face-off circles, and that's just something that's going to happen. The other thing is once you get past the face-offs is what happens in open play. And obviously, as a center, you spend more time in the middle of the ice, you make more plays on your backhand. When you're a winger, you spend more time along the wall, and it's maybe a bit more physical, and you have to really leverage your body position to make plays and to get the puck off the wall. So perhaps you would think that's automatic that a smaller, less physically mature player should play wing, but then you're putting him in these situations where he's getting uh, pinched against by a defenseman who's 6'4", 220, right? So you think that playing wing is easier, but it isn't always. So it's one of
Hmm.
those things where if you have a player who's really good in open ice, you would actually rather than maybe be more in open ice,
Mm.
or perhaps starting out on the wings, an opportunity for them to really get better at collecting pucks on the wall and getting off the wall and using their bodies to protect, and sustaining contact and making a play off of that. So it's just, as long as you don't look at it as like a kind of a throwaway decision where, oh, like every young player starts on the wing and then at some point you put them on center, like it really takes a lot more thought and a lot more observation than you would think.
Mm, okay, great point. Great point. Yeah, I think people do. I mean, even probably myself, reduce it simply to center hard, wing easy, and it's not that simple, right?
Which it isn't that. There's a lot more nuance to it.
Right, right. So no, thank you for reminding us of that. Well, Jack, as usual, as always, you bring it. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for giving us your time today. Before we let you go, anything else you want to promote? There's a Hockey Tactics 2024 book. There's your newsletter. Anything else?
I mean, if you're on Twitter, you can follow me at JHANHKY. Otherwise, I'm looking forward to being in touch with you guys throughout the season. I'm certainly going to watch more of the Sharks this year than I did
A
last
lot
year.
more people.
So are
So
their fans, to be
Yeah.
honest.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if you see anything or if I see anything, we can get together and talk it up.
That
Love
sounds
it.
good. That sounds good. A lot more to watch. There's a lot more excitement. So I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks a lot, Jack.
All right. Take care, fellas. Bye bye.
Take care.
Thanks so much.